That wish you'd never made, by Po_Tato2. Summary. I've got to get my things. Izuku turns to walk away from Eraserhead and Present Mic at the gate. I'll find you afterward, don't worry. We'll come with you, listener. Mike is quick to say, sliding in front of Izuku on the sidewalk. Izuku stares at them for a long moment, then grins in a way that could almost be considered teasing if it wasn't so full of spite. Good luck with that, Izuku says, and it doesn't sound pleasant. Eraserhead's face immediately changes, and his quirk flares as his scarf goes to lash out, but it's too late because Izuku has taken off, moving far faster than he should be able to, and is already out of Eraserhead's sight. Fuck, Mike mutters to the both of them. Or Izuku deserts his father's side in order to become a hero and save his brother. There's only two problems. He's a major asshole, and All Might hates his guts. Chapter 1. To Escape. Izuku doesn't make it more than 2 steps out of the bar before he's falling through one of Kurogiri's portals and landing at his father's feet. Years of ruthless training means he lands crouched on his hands and feet, and is quick to fully spring up. Going somewhere? The voice of his father echoes in both his head and his ears as Izuku slowly stands, a glare fixed on the tower of shadows it comes from. Just out, Izuku says shortly, speaking like his dad's presence alone doesn't send fear skittering along his spine. You seem to be in such a hurry, though, his father says languidly, with the pace of a man who has time in his grasp. And in the middle of the night, no less. Izuku refuses to let himself show any sign of nervousness. His father will catch them in an instant. That's when the opportunities are ripe for the picking. His father chuckles emptily, and Izuku stiffens minutely before he can stop himself. And what is it exactly you need opportunities for, Izuku? I can give you access to anything in the world you desire, my son. Just because you can doesn't mean you will. Izuku can't help but respond with a hint of steel in his voice. His back straightens from where it had started to bend. His father sighs, and Izuku can almost feel the way it makes the tightrope he's walking on sway. Don't tell me you honestly still believe you could be a hero. Something tightens in Izuku's chest, but he doesn't so much as flinch. He stays silent, unwilling to give his father more ammo. Tell me, Izuku. There is a loud hissing sound, like pressurized air escaping a canister. What was your plan? The steady clack of dress shoes against cement begins to sound, and Izuku grits his teeth. His father walks into the light of the dim light bulb above him, and he looks every bit the villain he is. Well over 6 feet tall, Izuku's father towers over not only him, but almost everyone else he's ever met. He somehow makes his, no doubt expensive, pristine suit look at home with the suction cup that's attached to his mouth, with a tube trailing down into an oxygen canister somewhere. A mouth with pearly white teeth grins at him as his father's otherwise featureless face turns in his direction. The wrinkled mess of scars that makes up his bald head and eyeless face only adds to his demonic presence. Did you even have a plan? All for One asks Izuku condescendingly, and doesn't give Izuku a chance to respond before continuing, the grin slowly fading from his face the longer he speaks. Is my own flesh and blood really so stupid as to believe you can simply waltz out of our home as if I wouldn't notice? Pressing his lips together tightly, Izuku folds his hands into fists to keep them from shaking. The malevolent aura that his father had been suppressing starts to leak back into the atmosphere, choking him slowly as fear tends to. I have a plan, Izuku says in a whisper, fighting to speak the way his throat is closing up. And so far it's going perfectly. If All for One had eyebrows, he would be raising one. Is that so? Izuku takes a step closer to his father, even though the animal part of his brain is screaming at him to run. It doesn't make sense to keep me here, and you know it. Oh, All for One says, and his tone grates on Izuku's ears like hot coals as his anger at his son's audacity seeps into the air. I'm too smart to be left to my own devices, Izuku dares. At this point, it makes more sense to kill me than it does to keep me here. All for One opens his mouth, and Izuku adds a last statement before he can speak. Whispering in Tomora's ear. A touch of intrigue colors All for One, and Izuku crushes the urge to sigh in relief. So that's the angle you're going to take, All for One muses out loud. That is rather clever, Izuku. Before Izuku can feel so much as a sprinkle of relief, his father adds, "So tell me why I shouldn't just kill you right here and be done with it." This time, Izuku can't stop himself from swallowing. He forces down his nerves, however. "Because I have a proposition for you." "You do you?" Now his father is amused, and Izuku isn't sure if that's better or worse. "You let me go now, without resistance," Izuku says, and to be a hero goes unspoken. "But if I fail, I will return and comply with all future orders." Izuku inhales, drawing strength from the part of him that is just like his father. "Give me one chance to try, and if I am wrong, I will drop this once and for all." The weight of his father's non-existent gaze falls on Izuku. He can feel his dad searching for a crack in the armor, for the slightest give in his resolve, and he finds none. "Truly you are your mother's son," All for One says, and Izuku doesn't know if it's a compliment. He's never met his mother, he doesn't even know what she looked like. All for One had spoken of her only a handful of times, and from them Izuku has gathered that although he truly loved her, he hated himself for doing so, and well, you can guess what happened after that. "I accept your terms, Izuku," All for One says, and he holds out a hand. Izuku knows what quirk it's for, and so he clenches his jaw as he approaches his father and grabs his hand without hesitation, ready for the pain he knows is about to come. The feeling of electricity runs through the point of contact, and Izuku's knees nearly buckle, but he manages to lock them in place through a habit made through years of brutal training. He refuses to scream in pain, even though it feels like his muscles are melting in his arms. Finally, his father lets go of his arm, and it takes everything in Izuku not to collapse to the ground. He manages to hold himself together as he sees Kurogiri appear near him. "I will be waiting, son." All for One's voice follows Izuku, echoing in his mind, not his ears, as he finally turns around to walk away through another portal. He doesn't look behind him, because he is more than aware that his father will know. His father sniffs out weaknesses like a rat searches for food, and he's quick to catch even the slightest whiff. This chance is more than Izuku ever thought he'd be given, and it may be a trick, maybe a trap, but he can't find it within himself to care. Not when freedom is the closest it's ever been. Kurogiri takes him to the alleyway he tried to first leave through. Izuku leaves one of his hands in the portal long enough to lean close and whisper, "Goodbye, Giri," to it. Then he exits it completely, the portal shutting down almost immediately afterwards. Izuku walks off into the dark, refusing to think of how, in the morning, Tomura will find the lengthy note he'd written him, and he refuses to think about the steps ahead of him, the trials he has yet to face. No. Right now, Izuku is free, or as free as he's ever been, and that's what matters. Chapter 2. The truth can be a funny thing. A boy with engines in his calves and glasses on his face, engine mutation, speed, enhanced leg muscles, and lung capacity, chops his hand in the air as he speaks, which Izuku distantly thinks is almost a hazard. UA's entrance exam is as crowded as Izuku expected it to be, and more, and it's filled with annoying characters that make Izuku's eyes twitch as they get too close to him. His documents and forged ID are accepted without hesitation, and Izuku walks to the examination room where the written exam is being held. He notes every hidden camera he passes. Despite the fact that all the information on both the mandatory papers he'd filled in and the ID he'd made for himself is all true, it remains that none of his information will be able to be verified in any way, shape, or form, and Izuku is positive that before the physical examination is over, the principal will have caught this. He has a plan for this, of course, a very simple plan, one so simple in fact many would call it stupid. But that's for after the robots. The written exam doesn't take Izuku long, and he pretends to meditate while peering at the different quirks that pass around him as he waits in the hallway outside an auditorium. Eventually, the other kids arrive, and they're treated to a pointless presentation by Present Mic, vocal cord and lung mutation, volume and pitch alteration, voice, including an interruption by the same hand chop kid from earlier. After a glance at the card he was given, Izuku is loaded onto a bus, which he can't help but roll his eyes at. They're waved off by Ectoplasm, or one of his clones, Izuku instantly assumes, and then a group of roughly 20 teenagers is left standing around in front of a giant entrance to a fake city they can't see much of. What a waste of funds. Present Mic screams that the exam has begun, and the words are barely out of his mouth before Izuku's taken off, darting forward through the bodies of other kids while the rest of them blink in confusion. "What are you waiting for?" Izuku hears Present Mic distantly scream, but he's already holding out a hand, palms splayed open, eyes focused on the two-pointer in front of him. He crunches his fingers into a fist, and the metal robot in front of him copies the motion, crumpling in on itself, metal screeching against metal. The end result is a crushed ball of robot as tall as Izuku's chest. He leaves it, already looking for his next target. He has 10 minutes, and he needs at least 40 points, at least, from what he's gathered. Izuku keeps moving. It takes him 5 minutes before he knows he's gotten at least 40 points, and after he slows his pace, happy to only crush a robot if it's about to hurt another examinee. He actually yanks an entire kid out of the way of a falling piece of concrete, because a kid's quirk allows him to turn his body to steel, using the same metal manipulation he's been using for the entire exam. He earns a shouted, "Thanks!" for the trouble. In no time, the zero-pointer robot is released, and Izuku is lucky enough to be directly in its path almost immediately. Kids run, screaming past him. There's no reason to show off and tire himself out, Izuku knows, and he's turning to head back to the entrance as well when he hears a girl scream. Spinning back around, Izuku immediately sees the problem. There's a girl he remembers seeing earlier who's now trapped under a huge piece of rubble from one of the buildings, directly in the zero-pointer's path. Sighing to himself, Izuku starts walking towards her. The ground is shaking from the force of the robot's steps, and Izuku wants to roll his eyes at the waste of resources and money. Typical. Izuku holds out a hand, looking at the zero-pointer, and he repeats the crushing motion he'd made on the earlier robots. Although it's not nearly as effortless as it was before, it's still easy, and it only takes him a few seconds to force the metal into a compact ball that has no chance of going anywhere. "Are you hurt?" Izuku asks the girl as he stops next to her. She gapes at him for a moment before managing to pull herself together. I think I twisted my ankle when I fell." Nodding, Izuku reaches down to grab at the giant piece of concrete that's clearly the main thing trapping her. "I'm going to lift this. Do you think you can get yourself out?" She nods, still looking shell-shocked, and Izuku distantly hopes she doesn't have a concussion too. He does exactly what he said, without wasting time, gritting his teeth a little but still pushing the concrete up with remarkably less effort than should be required. The girl pushes herself to her feet and hobbles on one foot out of range so Izuku can lower the debris again. On cue, an old lady scuttles towards them with speed, almost immediately appearing at the girl's side. Satisfied that the girl will be taken care of, Izuku slips away. He centers in and focuses on the different intentions he can feel, and follows the direction of faint curiosity and hostility grouped together. He knows that if the principal somehow hadn't managed to notice him before, he certainly had his attention after what he did to the zero-pointer, and there's no point in waiting for them to seek him out. He'll save everyone some time by just going to them. A scruffy man Izuku immediately recognizes as Eraserhead suddenly steps out of a random hallway directly in front of him. His face is as unreadable as Izuku's, and neither of them say a word as Izuku turns to walk down the hallway Eraserhead just came from. The presence of Eraserhead continues to follow Izuku the rest of the way as he navigates his way towards the room he can tell the principal is sitting in. The sense of curiosity and intrigue is so strong it almost makes Izuku wrinkle his nose, despite the fact that intents have no smell. Soundlessly, the door opens as Izuku approaches it, and the hero Izuku knows as Nezu steps out, snapping the door shut on the cacophony of sounds coming from the room behind him. Black eyes which hold intelligence that far surpasses Izuku's stare at him, and the principal of UA tilts his head. "Please follow me, Shigaraki-kun." Nezu turns around and starts to walk, and Izuku follows obediently. "I believe we have much to discuss." Eraserhead follows him with nearly no indication of his presence, and Izuku is impressed, because, without his intent quirk, he'd have a much harder time keeping track of where the man is. It takes Izuku only a moment to realize they must be heading to Nezu's office, and he cuts his eyes around as they walk, taking in more details of the world-famous UA High School. Shota doesn't take his eyes off the boy he's following. The kid is so normal that it makes Shota's eyes want to slide off of him, at least until he forces himself to focus. Then, finding himself able to notice all the things about him that are not normal. He's rather short and skinny enough to be just short of worrying. Curly white hair sits in a tangled heap on his head, and both his hair and body look like they need a good washing. Shigaraki, if that's really the kid's name, is covered in dirt and the kind of grit that comes from living rough. A few green freckles stand out on the boy's almost freakishly pale face, and Shota is just glad he isn't looking at him anymore, because the look in the kid's giant green eyes had been just short of poisonous. His shoulders are set straight back, yet they stay tense and ready for action. Shota can't read anything in the kid's motions. Not fear, not joy, not sadness, disgust, nervousness, anything. The kid is nothing like a kid, and it makes something primal in Shota want to run. They enter Nezu's office, and there is a pause as Nezu settles himself behind his desk, and Shigaraki sits in the chair that the principal gestures to. Shota recently sits as well, when Nezu tilts his head at him. "Would you care to explain the application you submitted?" Nezu starts, and Shota knows he's leaving it open-ended to see what Shigaraki thinks they're talking about. Nothing moves on the kid's face. "What part did you need explained, Nezu-san?" "Why don't you start from the beginning?" Nezu says with a smile, and Shota sighs to himself. "My name is Shigaraki-Izuku," Shigaraki says, and Shota wonders if he's blinked at all this entire time. "Well, Shigaraki-kun, there appears to be a slight problem," Nezu says, folding his paws over each other. "Because I'm afraid you don't exist in any government databases." Shigaraki nods a single time. "Yes, that would be because my father never reported me to the Japanese government." "Why?" Nezu's ear tilts forward in intrigue, and Shota slouches further in his chair without taking his eyes off Shigaraki. All of a sudden, a dry smile slips off the kid's face, and it almost makes Shota want to shiver. "Surely you've guessed by now, Nezu-san. After all, I put my quirk right there on the paper for you." One way or another, Shota just knows this is going to end terribly. "The villain all for one is your father," Nezu says, and Shigaraki's hands twitch. Shota furrows his brow. He feels like he's heard that name somewhere, but... Villain? Yes. There is something cold in Shigaraki's eyes. "And you inherited his quirk?" "Yes." "And you want to be a hero?" "Yes." No hesitation, no pause, no doubt. The unspoken question of why hangs in the air. After a moment, Shigaraki leans forward slightly, eyes trained on Nezu. "I'm sure you know what my father has done, the things he's capable of. Think of that man, and then think of a child who was born soft and sweet and loving." Shota watches with a sort of sickness in his gut as Nezu's lips pinch together. "A supervillain," Shigaraki continues, something angry in the lines of his body. "Has no use for a child with tears in his eyes, but all for one believes himself to value his family, so he would never get rid of that child. He would fix them instead." There is a silent sorrow in the room as Shota and Nezu watch Shigaraki spread out his hands and stare at his palms. "I know you're wondering why I'm here, whether or not to believe me, if I'm even fit to be a hero at all after the upbringing I've no doubt had." Shigaraki places his hands back down on his thighs and looks back up, mask once again in place, eyes blank and years older than they should be. "I'm here for 2 reasons. First of all, to even your odds, and secondly because despite everything I've lived through, I never quite stop wanting to be someone who could save someone like me." And as touching as the second part of Shigaraki's statement is, and as much as Shota can tell he means it, that is not the part he nor Nezu focuses on. "To even our odds?" Nezu asks. Shigaraki raises an eyebrow, and Shota can't help but notice how it feels like every one of his actions is artificially crafted. "Don't tell me you actually think he's dead." A heavy chill runs down Shota's spine, and he notices the almost imperceptible way some of the hair on the back of Nezu's neck stands up. "I had my suspicions," Nezu carefully says. Shigaraki snorts. All Might is an idiot for assuming something like that. He's arrogant. Shota forces himself to speak up. "What happened?" Sharp green eyes cut over to him, considering. Whatever the kid is looking for, he must find it, because he answers. 6 years ago, All Might and All for One had the greatest battle of both their lives, and it brought both of them to the brink of death. After a collision from both of them, where All Might smashed in my father's head, and my father tore a hole through All Might's torso, a building collapsed. The casual way Shigaraki describes the potent acts of violence by and against his own dad is disturbing, but from the little he's learned, Shota guesses there's no love lost between father and son. All Might was in critical condition, and he assumed the damage he had caused to All For One was so great that no man could survive it, healing quirks or not. Later he learned All For One's body was never found amongst the wreckage, but this didn't change his assumption. Unmoved, Shigaraki stares at Shota. That's what makes him a fool at best, and suicidal at worst. Shigaraki says, and Shota wishes he could disagree. So, Shigaraki looks back over to Nezu. What I mean by even the odds is that it is obvious to both me and my father that All Might is weakened, and if I can think of ways to exploit it, then I assure you my father can think of 100 more. Shigaraki's eyes seem to glow. Unlike All Might, All For One has spent the last 6 years healing and consolidating power as best he can. I am one of the weapons he was building, and I am one of, if not the only person who can stand head-to-head with All Might, or to All For One. I would never be so arrogant as you to say you need me, Shigaraki says, but I'll go so far as to say that I can reduce potential casualties, hero and civilian, by at least 50%. And by casualties, Shigaraki adds, green eyes cutting briefly to Shota like he knows. I do not mean injuries, I mean death. Shota doesn't know where the kid is getting these numbers, and there's plenty of things far more important he doesn't know either, but the feeling in his gut that every hero has learned to trust is telling him yes. Shota makes eye contact with Nezu, and he can't tell what his boss is thinking, but he does give him the tiniest, most imperceptible nod. The kid has his vote of confidence, which isn't easy to get. Based on the shine that enters Nezu's eyes, that makes up his mind. On the first day, do come see me after classes so that we can wrap up a few final things, please, Shigaraki-kun. But for now, welcome to Your Hero Academia. Nezu smiles at Shigaraki unsettlingly as he hands him an envelope. When did he prepare that? And Shota somehow isn't surprised to see Shigaraki return a mirror version of the same grin right back at Nezu. Thank you very much, Nezu-san. Shigaraki stands up and bows shallowly, and turns and does the same to Shota. Eraserhead-san? Without another word, Shigaraki turns around and walks right out of Nezu's office, envelope clutched tightly in hand. Chapter 3. I Want Him to Live. In a different life, Izuku may have stopped and stayed at the entrance of UA in awe, marvelled at the fact that he was wearing a UA uniform, been amazed at the sight of the gigantic buildings before him, famous across Japan. But in this life, Izuku's face didn't budge, and his feet didn't stumble as he walked into the awe-inspiring gates of UA with a blank face, a hint of disdain in his eyes. It's hard not to harbour a kernel of hatred for the place, with its flashy exterior and heroic stereotypes. Izuku checks the map he was given once he's on the grounds, because there's no sense in wasting time or power trying to find the correct building when there's a very easy solution in front of him. His classroom is easy to find once he's in the building, and even better, there are only a few other brats in the room. Ignoring the engine mutation boy he remembers from the entrance exam, Izuku takes his seat. He ignores the chattering of his new classmates that only grows with each person that enters the classroom, and he ignores every attempt made to talk to him. He honestly just counts himself lucky that no one has tried to touch him yet, because what little he's managed to learn about teenagers his age indicates they aren't that far removed from toddlers, just with more mobility and more hormones. Loud, always talking, don't understand the concept of personal space, and likes to have everyone's attention on them. Once the classroom is filled with people who Izuku is supposed to be classmates with, he's madly debating leaping from the classroom window as the noise level steadily grows louder, when he notices the classroom door open and no one enter. Glancing down, Izuku stares at the yellow monstrosity on the floor that he can see Eraserhead's quirk nestled inside. What the fuck? Is he trapped in there? Izuku stares in incredulity as the yellow thing slowly starts to rotate, no one else paying attention to it. Seconds later, Izuku feels a vague horror as a window appears, and he immediately makes eye contact with Eraserhead, whose face fits perfectly inside the window. The sudden wave of amusement Izuku can feel from his intent quirk tells him that Eraserhead finds his reaction amusing, so he probably isn't in danger and is just weird. Whatever. Izuku's worry disappears, and he lets his face settle back into blankness, although he's curious what exactly Eraserhead's plan is. Somehow, Eraserhead smoothly rises up from the ground, and as several people yelp, he unzips his sleeping bag, letting it fall to the floor. He's drinking some sort of pouch thing, and he flares his quirk at the class, which immediately draws the rest of the stragglers' attention. It took you 8 seconds to quiet, and only a single person noticed me enter the room. I hope you plan to shape up since you're sitting in the hero course. Izuku didn't have any particular opinion on Eraserhead before this, but he thinks that he may actually like the man, given his introduction. His classmates, Izuku immediately notices, do not seem to share his view. Grab the uniform with their name on it and change, then meet me outside on the lawn. Be quick about it. Eraserhead manages to pull out a stack of uniforms from his sleeping bag, which he drops on the top of his desk before walking out of the room. And honestly, Izuku respects that. Several of his classmates are saying something, but Izuku doesn't really think any of them are worth listening to at the moment, so he ignores all of them and gets up, marching to the front of the classroom and digging through the stack of uniforms without a word. As expected, his movement pushes everyone else up, and Izuku rolls his eyes to himself. 6 minutes later, Izuku is waiting on the lawn in front of Eraserhead, and the kid with the elemental quirk, fire left and ice right, temperature balance, emitter and mutation, is quick to join him. We're going to be taking a quirk assessment test, Eraserhead announces once everyone is out of the changing rooms. Izuku sneers at the chattering that bursts out of his classmates. Eraserhead seems to share his opinion, based on the way he says whoever comes in last will get expelled. The ensuing panic makes Izuku's eye twitch, and he actively has to fight to keep from rolling his eyes. Naive. Shigaraki? Eraserhead jerks his head when Izuku looks at him. Izuku pushes forward to the bundle of students from where he'd strategically placed himself at the very back. Izuku just barely brushes all the tips of his fingers over the girl from the entrance exam's shoulder. Gravity nullification, potential manipulation, nausea side effects, emitter and fingertip mutation, as he walks past, fast enough that no one even notices. No one but Eraserhead. Eraserhead, whose red eyes burn into Izuku as he steps into the circle, not wasting a second before grabbing the ball offered him and activating the girl's quirk on it. It is dead silent as he throws the ball straight up, and as Eraserhead eventually turns his counter to show the measurement of infinity. Wow, you guys have super similar quirks! The red-haired guy, emitter, skin hardening, dry out side effects, shouts with a good-natured grin. Voices start to murmur. The girl stares at Izuku with wide eyes, a hint of terror and a sizable amount of confusion in them. Eraserhead looks at Izuku, and Izuku knows he's going to let him take the lead. May as well get it over with. No. Izuku looks at the guy, his expression blank. We don't. It's hers. And just like that, all the talking stops. What are you on about, man? The redhead chuckles nervously, but his smile looks much more forced than it did moments ago. The quirk I used. Izuku raises an eyebrow. It's hers. Another moment of deafening silence before the meaning of Izuku's words finally starts to sink in. So you copied it? A boy with round elbows says, glancing around like he doesn't understand why some people look so scared. I don't see why that's such a big deal. Izuku huffs out a breath in a way that could generously be called a laugh. No, I took it. No one is smiling anymore, Izuku notices. Stealing another's quirk is reprehensible. The one with the leg engines yells, right as someone else starts saying something about it being unfair, about it being impossible. Voices start rising quickly. Izuku can smell their terror. It only lasts for a few seconds before Eraserhead flashes his quirk at the class, shouting for silence. Izuku looks back at his naive classmates impassively. A boy in the back, the one with mental quirk, call and response, emitter, mind control, insomnia side effects, purple hair, meets Izuku's eyes, head tilted slightly. He is one of the few spots in the small crowd of students that lack fear or hostility. Before Eraser can say something else, Izuku looks over the rest of his classmates with a curled lip, making his expression as disgusted as possible. He starts to walk away from the chalk circle, but before he goes, he says, treating people like this is what makes a villain in the first place, you know? You may not want to be on the side of a hero who has his quirk, but the real question is if you would rather fight a villain with it instead. Several faces go pale, mouths dropping and eyes wide. Izuku rolls his eyes and walks back to merge with the class again, and does an admirable job of not reacting as people part to get out of his way. Izuku stops suddenly, though, making several people flinch, and reaches out his hand towards Uraraka, hovering his hand just above her shoulder. He cocks his head when she freezes, looking at him nervously. Well, do you want your quirk back or not? She flushes, but nods. The entire class watches silently as Izuku briefly touches all 5 fingers to her shoulder, then walks away. Todoroki, Eraserhead suddenly calls, jerking everyone's eyes back to him. Your turn. The next several tests pass in relative silence, everyone on edge. Izuku supposes it doesn't help that he continues to take quirks if they can help him, ignoring the growing reactions and emotions, the way people jerk away from him in vain. It's only after the sprint that someone grows the guts to ask him a question, however. Hey, Shigaraki, right? Izuku turns his head to meet eyes with the boy with the lightning bolt in his hair, emitter mutation, electricity generation amplification, overload side effects, who's looking at him with poorly hidden nerves. What? The kid glances at Izuku's tone, but shoulders on asking. If you don't mind me asking, man, why didn't you use his quirk for the sprint? As he speaks, he points to the engine boy. Staring at the guy in silence for a few moments, Izuku decides to reward his bravery and answer his question. Although I could take mutation quirks, it tends to be extremely painful for the original owner to lose them, not to mention for myself to grow them. Everyone had turned and been entirely unsubtle about waiting for Izuku's answer, so Izuku gets to see the engine boy go pallid and pale, several people following his example, as his classmates seem to connect what Izuku's saying. Oh, the electricity boy mutters. Yeah, that makes sense, dude. Izuku makes a vague humming noise in response, already turning away. Intent, a quirk he often leaves on, if only for his own peace of mind, is telling him that the lightning bolt kid is more scared than curious of him. Although Izuku privately will admit, the fact that the boy at least pretended to be normal towards Izuku was a nice enough thought. The rest of the test pass in a tense, slightly terrified silence. Izuku desperately wants to take Yairo's quirk to experiment with, but he's all too aware that asking if he can borrow her quirk just to play around with it won't go over well. Not to mention, he doesn't have enough knowledge to really have fun with it. No one is surprised when the end results show Izuku in first place. When Izuku walks back to the changing rooms, there is a significant pause before the others start to follow him. The silence that ensues doesn't bother him, and neither does the awkward whispering that starts up in the classroom. None of it matters. They'll adapt. At the end of the day, Izuku turns to the end of a hallway, immediately making eye contact with Eraserhead, who'd been waiting for him, he knew. Let's go, he says, and has the pleasure of watching Eraserhead's eyebrows raise. Excuse me? Rolling his eyes, Izuku starts walking. Nezu wants to see me, doesn't he? That's what you came to get me for. Come on, I've got places to be. It only takes Izuku 2 steps for Eraserhead to start moving. They travel swiftly through the school in silence, passing the occasional lingering group of students or teachers. They're still 2 hallways away when Izuku realizes. He stops in his tracks, despite himself, and Eraserhead turns back to him when he realizes he's no longer keeping pace with him. Problem? All Might's there? Izuku asks, although it's more of a statement. The intent quirk tells him Eraserhead feels surprise, trepidation, concern towards him, and the man winces. Yeah. Izuku's eye twitches, and then he pulls his facial muscles under control as he starts walking again. How much did Nezu tell him? The pause before Eraserhead speaks doesn't bode well, and sure enough, Eraser says, all of it. Sighing, Izuku can't help but mutter, Awesome. Eraserhead casts a glance at him from the side of his eye, then says, You seem to already know how All Might feels about this situation. Izuku isn't going to tell him that All Might's hatred towards him is so strong it's nearly overwhelming, and they're not even in the same room. Call it intuition. The only response Eraserhead gives is a non-committal hum, but Izuku can feel the thrum of worry that runs around him. Don't let him kill me, Izuku mutters right as the door to Nezu's office opens, and the spike of alarm from Eraserhead is a slight consolation for the hell he's positive this interaction is about to be. Izuku enters the room, Eraserhead behind him, and his eyes immediately fall on the figure that half the people on Earth could recognize by image alone. All Might stands tall, taking up far too much room in what is already a rather large office. Arms crossed over his chest, All Might turns and meets Izuku's eyes. He is not smiling. Ah, Shotokan and Shigaraki-kun. Thank you for the prompt arrival, Nezu says, prompting everyone in his office to turn and look at him. Izuku can feel the way All Might is still staring at him from the corner of his eye, though, and he stays tensed, ready to run. Eraserhead murmurs something while Izuku just dips into a brief bow. He forces his hands to stay still, despite the way he knows they instinctively want to shake. All Might, Nezu says with a human smile. This is Shigaraki Izuku, and You are his son? All Might interrupts Nezu, and his tone is nothing like the All Might the Japanese public knows and loves. Slowly, Izuku turns, and he faces down the giant, who has loosely curled his hands into fists. Yes. A muscle spasms in All Might's face. A brief peek into his intent quirk immediately overwhelms him with a wave of disgust, hatred, outrage, hostility. Izuku slams the quirk off before he drowns in the intensity of All Might's feelings. He got his answer anyway. He sent you here, All Might says with surety, like he's the expert in the room. Izuku looks at him like he's stupid. Were you not listening when Nezu told you the situation? Or do you think you're smarter than the most intelligent mammal in Japan? Blood rushes to All Might's face as it turns red with indignation and anger. Don't play games with me, boy. Whatever tricks you pull on them won't work on me. The urge to snort is too strong to resist, so Izuku doesn't bother. If I were playing a game, I would decline to include you in the dialogue, I assure you. The fact that I have to interact with you means I have no control here. There is a slight shift in All Might's body language for a moment, and Izuku realizes he somehow managed to confuse him. Izuku watches All Might shake himself, clearing his head. State your real purpose, All Might orders. Izuku can feel the steadily growing annoyance and anger of Eraserhead behind him, and it's slightly vindicating. Nezu stays silent, watching, and Izuku wants to throw himself and the principal out the window, because this was obviously planned. To go to school, Izuku says dryly, and gives a thumbs up to All Might, who looks like he wants to grab Izuku's thumb and crush it in his hand. Pearly white teeth grind together. Izuku captures a glimpse of a spot of blood. Stop playing with me, child. I am being merciful right now. Answer my questions. And finally, he says something that strikes Izuku's chords a little too close to the core. How many times has he heard his father say the same thing after putting him through hell and back? Merciful. Izuku's face twitches, even as it obediently settles back into blankness, as it's been trained. There is no such thing as mercy, not to him. I'm confused on what makes you think I owe you shit, Izuku says, his face blank but eyes raging and voice mockingly high. All Might is staring at him with something Izuku can only describe as unbridled hatred. The words make All Might snap finally, and he draws himself up, filled with self-righteous justice. Listen here, Vil. That's enough. Eraserhead steps in between them. You are a teacher right now, and you are expected to act like one. Eraserhead says sternly to All Might, who purses his lips. You don't understand, he tells Eraserhead, and Izuku thinks Eraser may actually blow steam from his ears. Eraserhead narrows his eyes, and Izuku watches All Might twitch like he wants to wince. Do not talk to me, Eraserhead says slowly, like I am a child. All Might seems to realize he has crossed a line, and he takes a breath, backing down from Eraserhead for the moment. Instead, he turns back to Izuku. I have a hard time believing your father just let you join UA with the intent of becoming a hero, All Might says, with anger still lingering in his voice, and Izuku thinks it's kind of a good point. Izuku tilts his head all the way up so he can make eye contact with the angry baby blue eyes. I've spent the last 5 years rebelling against him, and now that I'm smart enough to convert Tomura, he'd rather lose his unruly son than lose his willing successor. All Might presses his lips together tightly, and Izuku can tell he knows he isn't lying. He's probably also pondering the random name Izuku just said, but then again, thinking about two things at once may be beyond All Might's thinking capabilities. I want a list of every quirk you have, All Might suddenly demands, setting his hand on his hips in his classic hero pose. Izuku stares impassively back at him. Yeah, well, I want a dad that loves me, but we don't always get what we want, do we? There's a suspicious coughing noise from Eraserhead that Izuku suspects could be laughter, while All Might just sputters nonsensically. I'm not asking, child, All Might finally spits. Why would I give a man who clearly hates me the only information on me he has no way to get? Izuku asked All Might impertinently. I am the #1 hero, All Might shouts, and Izuku just rolls his eyes. And you got there by training to eradicate my father and all traces of him. Izuku curls his lips up at the figure towering over him. You can call yourself the #1 hero all you want, but right now all I see is another person using their power to shove me around. Eraserhead makes an aborted motion forward, like he wants to step in but doesn't know how to at this point. Nezu hasn't moved from where he sits calmly at his desk, paws folded, eyes darting between the figures in his office. All Might turns red in the face, and for a moment, Izuku actually wonders if the man is going to spontaneously explode with anger at his words. You are the symbol of your son, he said grandly, like it matters, like Izuku doesn't fucking know that. And yet you're the one acting like him right now, Izuku snarls, pure and unfiltered anger rising its way through his chest, his expression cracking open. All Might jolts back, like Izuku hit him, and the stricken look that rises on his face makes the hungry thing that lives in Izuku lick its lips. He doesn't take no for an answer either, Izuku snarls, and he's quick to throw around his title when he thinks it'll get him what he wants. All Might's expression twitches, something in his eyes crumbling. Izuku isn't done. Taking a single step forward, Izuku continues, his tongue going dark with something menacing. And, just like you, All Might, my father holds no regard for others unless they can do something for him. All for one, All Might physically takes a step back, like the name itself hurts him to hear. Would act exactly like you right now if you met your child, no matter who or what they were. That, of all things, seems to finally hit All Might. There is war in his eyes, and Izuku knows it because he's right. So you'll have to forgive me for treating you with the same caution I treat him. All Might stumbles away from Izuku like he's something viscerally horrifying, like he's something so twisted that All Might can't even bear to be near him. I am nothing like him, he finally says, but it sounds weak. Then stop acting like it, Izuku says definitively, then fully turns away from him and back to Nezu. He's finished talking with All Might. Izuku doesn't even bother looking at the symbol of peace. I believe it's time for you to take your leave, All Might, Nezu says, cutting through All Might's stuttering. I can handle it from here. It's a testament to how lost All Might must be, because he only stares for a few seconds before turning around and walking slowly to the door. It feels like his footsteps rattle the floor, but Izuku could be exaggerating. When All Might leaves, Present Mic steps in before the door closes, looking straight to Eraserhead with a raised eyebrow. Izuku notices. The office is silent. So, where were we? Nezu finally says, clasping his paws together. Izuku has several very interesting answers to that question, but he has a feeling that now is not the time, and he manages to choke them down. Introductions, Izuku says dryly, and it's the most polite he can bring himself to be. Something that could be a smile or a snarl curls on Nezu's face. So we were. On that note, Shigaraki-kun, this is Present Mic, or Yamada-san. Hisashi-kun, this is Shigaraki Izuku. Izuku turns, meeting the green eyes of Present Mic through his yellow sunglasses. Nice to meet you, Shigaraki-kun, he exclaims, aiming stationary finger guns at him. Izuku has no idea what that's supposed to mean, but Present Mic is probably the only person who's been genuinely enthused to meet him, or is at least very good at pretending. In a split second, Izuku peeks at the strands from the intent quirk that's coming off Present Mic. Curiosity, concern, intrigue, excitement, kindness. Izuku offers him a bow. You as well, Yamada-san. Well, Nezu claps his paws together. I'm sure you're wondering what it is I've called you here to discuss. Once again, Izuku resists the urge to say, obviously. I just have a few clarifying questions to ask, if you wouldn't mind, Nezu says, but it is very clearly not a request. Izuku just nods his head. Nezu glances at one of the papers on his desk. You mentioned that Offram was building several weapons. You listed yourself as one of them. Calmly, Nezu stares at Izuku and ignores the awkward noise Present Mic makes at Nezu's words. What are the others? The question was one Izuku was expecting, of course, but that doesn't make what he's about to talk about any less painful. He and a doctor are building genetic weapons with multiple quirks that will look and act like monsters. The information is startling, Izuku is well aware, but he keeps talking, because he can't stop himself at this point. The other main weapon is who I mentioned earlier. My brother. Tomura, Eraserhead murmurs, and if Izuku were a better person, he'd be touched that the hero remembered. Yes, and something interesting happens on Izuku's face. Something where, for a moment, it looks like it wants nothing more than to crumble into pieces and cry. And yet, he does not. Tomura is older than me. My father got Tomura when he thought I was not going to develop a quirk. His quirk. Izuku inhales, holding himself together. All for One has never seen Tomura as a person. He has and always will be a means to an end for him. I have to save Tomura. Izuku's clenched fists are pushed into the sides of the chairs. His face is disturbingly calm. I may not have ulterior motives, but I do have a personal goal, and it is to save my brother even if it costs me my life. Present Mic blanches, and even Eraserhead winces. Nezu doesn't move, his black eyes staring into Izuku's empty ones. And what if that cost is a hero's life? A student's life? Nezu asks, pressing Izuku. Izuku doesn't so much as blink. If you follow my plan, that won't happen. Your plan? Present Mic pipes up. For the first time, Izuku grins. It looks wrong, and later Aizawa realizes he smiles like Nezu does, like he's only copying human mannerisms. I didn't exactly come unprepared. I have a plan, and a contingency plan, and another contingency plan for that, and more after that. Eraserhead finally speaks, and yet you seem unsure of your own ending. Let me be as clear as possible. Izuku splays his palms out, flat on his knees. His shoulders look far too heavy. Tomura will never be free as long as my father lives. And although my first two plans end with me likely living, the ones after that do not. Because I will have to be the one to kill him. I'm the only one who can anymore. There is an aborted choking noise from Present Mic's direction, but Izuku doesn't look away from Nezu's face. I need to know Tomura will be taken care of if I'm gone. I am not going to all of the effort to free him just so he can end up locked up, alone. He's always had me in Kurogiri. Now he just has Kurogiri. I refuse to leave him alone. Izuku's voice doesn't quite crack, but it comes close. He finally closes his eyes, looking down in his lap. A hand gently settles itself on his shoulder. Emitter mutation, quirk erasure, eyes blink, weak temporal telekinesis, dry eye side effect. And Izuku lets it stay. I won't let him be forgotten, Eraserhead says, and Izuku takes it, because he knows it's all Eraserhead can promise him without consulting with Nezu and the authorities. Thank you, Izuku rasps, and Eraserhead doesn't know it, but Izuku has pulled up a quirk he's only used a handful of times, because of how rarely it's needed. Emitter, bond, promise, unconscious force, and he knows that whether or not Eraserhead means his words, he will obey them. Kurogiri? Nezu says, tilting his head after a moment of silence. Oh, Izuku blinks, pulling his thoughts together. Right, he's complicated. To put it as simple as possible, he's a sentient zombie with a fused quirk that's always been mean to him as caretaker. Izuku's hesitation does not go unnoticed, he's sure, but no one says anything about it, fortunately. Sentient zombie? Present Mic yells, although not that loud, considering his quirk. Fused quirk? Nezu echoes, his ears straight in the motion Izuku knows means interest. Caretaker? Eraserhead says, and it almost makes Izuku crack a smile. Okay, to make it a little more complicated while still keeping it simple, Kurogiri is a Nomu. Nomu are creatures that are made from corpses, sometimes of multiple people, and usually they have multiple quirks shoved in them. That's what I meant earlier. Kurogiri is special because he's capable of independent action and thought, although he still has to obey my dad's overall commands and anything Tomura tells him. Izuku plows forward. He's always taken care of me and Tomura because my father was off being evil, I guess. I also think he doesn't like kids, but whatever. Anyway, Kurogiri cooks, cleans, tutors, goes shopping, and chauffeurs. I say he's special because all of the Nomu are brainless. They follow direct orders and that's it. Kurogiri can think for himself. Mostly. If father thinks he's getting too liberative with us, he takes Kurogiri in for a checkup. If it's even possible, I want to save him, too. Izuku frowns to himself. Kurogiri's yellow eyes glowing in his mind. His memories were erased, but sometimes I think there's a part of him that's still in there. He loves me and Tomura. And then, much softer, he told me that once. The adults in the room watch with something like regret and sorrow as Izuku looks up, face visibly hardening, his ever-present anger coming back to his face like it never ended. And father fixed him as soon as he found out. Izuku spits out the words like poison, and when Tomura asked him why, father told him it was because love is weak. Conviction bleeds from Izuku when he says, and that is why he must die. I will never have a family while he lives. It is quiet for a moment too long. I see, Nezu finally says. Very well. The only other thing I require of you right now is to go over a few simple questions with the detective while wearing quirk suppression cuffs. The one whose quirk can detect lies, I suppose? Izuku ignores the incredulous stares from Eraserhead and Present Mic. Nezu almost looks amused. Yes, Detective Tsukauchi. When will he be here? Quite soon. Nezu peers at Izuku in a way that slightly reminds Izuku of Goraki. You're quite the interesting young man. Izuku stares at Nezu for a long moment. It hasn't come without a price. The principal's expression sobers. I'm sure. The four of them sit in silence for several minutes, and although Present Mic tries to break the awkward atmosphere a couple of times, Eraserhead eventually tells him something that gets him to stop, and Izuku is honestly grateful. Finally, Nezu's office door opens once more. Hello, I'm Detective Tsukauchi. One of the plainest men Izuku has ever seen bows in Izuku's direction when he enters the room. Izuku returns the shallow bow. This won't take long. Tsukauchi reassures Izuku. Not that Izuku is worried about that. Nezu hands the folder to the detective. I will be recording the conversation, and I need you to verbally respond to my questions, alright? The detective looks at Izuku and waits for him to nod before continuing. You probably know this, but my quirk is lie detector, which will be activated through the interview. If you have any objections, please state them now. Izuku shakes his head, and Tsukauchi sends him a tight smile. At the very least, Izuku can appreciate a man who knows how to stay professional despite his personal feelings on the subject. The detective sets the disc on the table in front of them, then presses a button. Detective Tsukauchi, ID 587468. Performing a requested interview on Shigaraki Izuku. Location, UA. Witnesses Yamada Hisashi, alias Present Mic, Aizawa Shota, alias Eraserhead, and Nezu. My quirk will be activated to have this interview and the answers recorded. Shigaraki-kun, do you acknowledge this? Tsukauchi looks at Izuku. Yes. Thank you. Please state your name. Shigaraki Izuku. Truth. Who is your biological father? The villain known as All for One. Izuku watches as Tsukauchi flinches just slightly at the name. Truth. What are your motives for attending UA High School? I want to become a hero. I have the personal goal of wanting to save kids who have villains or criminals as parents. Present Mic's face twitches in Izuku's peripheral vision. Truth. Were you sent to UA by All for One or by another enemy of heroes? No. Truth. Are you still in contact with All for One? No. Although I'm sure he could find me if he really wanted to. Tsukauchi looks uneasy, as do the other adults, when he says, Truth. Are you in contact with any criminal or villainous contacts? No. Truth. Are you wearing any kind of electronic device right now? Good question. Izuku applauds him in his head. No. Truth. Do you have any intention to cause harm to the teachers or students of UA? Izuku shakes his head manually, even as he answers out loud. No. Truth. Do you have any intention of working or acting in tandem with any outside forces to plot or act against UA or heroes? What a complex question. Izuku wonders if Tsukauchi's quirk could really account for all of that. No. Truth. Do you plan to plot or act against UA as a whole, or any hero? No. Wanted to be thorough, did they? Truth. Do you plan on taking any student or staff members of UA's quirks? Tsukauchi grimaces after asking. No. Izuku doesn't blame Nezu for wanting to know. If anything, he'd be stupid not to have asked. Truth. Tsukauchi glances down at the list of questions Nezu gave him, and he suddenly blanches. He pauses for a moment too long, and Izuku already knows he's about to hate this question. If you had to choose, he says slowly, would you save your brother's life or a hero's life? Izuku glances at Nezu and dares to raise an eyebrow at the mammal, They both know the question isn't necessary for the test. Nezu only smiles at him, showing his teeth. Since this is supposed to be a truth test, Izuku says, I'm going to be honest and tell you that I don't know. Tsukauchi's eyebrows fly up. It would all depend on everything that had led up to that moment. Who's the hero? What led them to being a moment from death? What led to Tomura being a moment from death? Izuku shrugs. A question like that is one that will always have constantly changing answers, because the variables will always change, from the weather to how much I slept the night before. Truth, Tsukauchi finally says, and he almost sounds a little confused by it. End of questioning, Tsukauchi says, then presses the button on the disc again before picking it up. He puts it back into his bag before he suddenly pauses, then turns to look at Izuku. Wait. If you aren't my awful one, where are you even living right now? The detective asks with crumpled eyebrows, and Izuku internally winces. Fuck. I had the situation covered, Izuku says, and while he knows Tsukauchi will register the word as truth, he also knows it will not be a satisfactory answer. Based on the look Eraserhead immediately gets on his face, Izuku knows he may well have just told the truth. Try again, Eraserhead dryly says, making Izuku grimace. This is going to be a pain. Nowhere, Izuku groans, because he knows there's no way the heroes won't do something about it. You call that having the situation covered? The detective says with a wry smile. Roughly exhaling, Izuku slumps into the chair. Detective, there are very few situations that I could get into that I wouldn't be able to cover. An awkward silence follows Izuku's words, as if the adults in the room briefly forgot that the child in front of them was a verifiable powerhouse, probably capable of going against All Might. But then again, Tsukauchi hadn't asked any questions about his quirk. Perhaps Nezu's version of an olive branch? Fortunately, we're already working on a plan, listener, Present Mic says, pointing a finger dramatically at Izuku like he just won a prize on a TV show. Before Izuku could say anything, Eraserhead continued. We figured that would be the case, and we've already decided the easiest and best solution for everyone would be for you to come live with us. Izuku can't stop one of his eyebrows from raising. You and Present Mic? He says, ignoring the important parts of the sentence. That'll be correct, Present Mic says, and everyone in the room is promptly startled as Izuku clenches his hand into a fist and pulls it downward as he hisses. Fuck yeah, tomorrow owes me 2,000 yen. Eraserhead sighs for an inhumanly long time, rubbing one hand against the top of his forehead. Why is it always me? He mutters to himself. Unfortunately for him, Izuku hears him, and, once again, can't stop himself from responding with the truth no one wants to hear. Because you're the only one who actually believes in the villain's son. Izuku looks at Present Mic for a moment, then, too, whose expression has turned grim. You two aren't afraid of me, even though you should be, so you're stuck with me. Of course we aren't afraid of you, Present Mic says, and although Izuku knows he's trying to comfort him, he just shakes his head in response. You should be. Everyone is right to stay away from me. And Izuku isn't sad as he says it, because it's a fact, and one that he came to terms with a long time ago. He is nothing like anyone, and when people know who or what he is, they inevitably end up trembling at his feet. Izuku can't tell if Present Mic looks more sad or disappointed in his answer. Fear is what makes the world turn, Present Mic. Looking away, Izuku glances out the window in Nezu's office. And I spin on an axis of my own. Well, I think that's all I needed, Tsukauchi finally says awkwardly, and it jolts everyone out of the stupor they'd suddenly lulled into. Ah, yes, thank you for coming, detective, Nezu says, and Tsukauchi bows in his direction before offering nods at Eraserhead and Present Mic, then a wave at Izuku before bucking it out of the room. Izuku didn't really blame him, to be honest. Was there anything else? Izuku turns to Nezu, and while he's being a bit rude, he's annoyed and tired enough not to care. Today has been the most social interaction he's had in years. Oh no, that's all. Thank you, Shigaraki-kun. Nezu waves a paw, which is evidently a dismissal because Present Mic and Eraserhead move to the door. Izuku is quick to follow. They walk the halls in silence, and apart from the occasional whispered words between Eraserhead and Present Mic, who wisely aren't letting Izuku out of their sight, there isn't a lot of conversation going on. I've got to get my things. Izuku turns to walk away from Eraserhead and Present Mic at the gate of UA. I'll find you afterward, don't worry. We'll come with you, listener, Mic is quick to say, sliding in front of Izuku on the sidewalk. Izuku stares at them for a long moment, then grins in a way that could almost be considered teasing if it wasn't so full of spite. Good luck with that, Izuku says, and it doesn't sound pleasant. Eraserhead's face immediately changes, and his quirk flares as his scarf goes to lash out, but it's too late because Izuku has taken off, moving far faster than he should be able to, and is already out of Eraserhead's sight. Fuck, Mike mutters for the both of them. Chapter 4. Caged, a bird bruised black and blue. It takes 2 hours for Izuku to appear at Eraserhead and Present Mic's front door, with a blank face and annoyed eyes. "Hope you like cats," is the only thing Aizawa says to him, although Izuku can tell he has far more he wants to say. "Course," Izuku responds. Eraserhead gestures Izuku inside, and as soon as Izuku's through the door, 3 cats swarm his feet, chirping and making various noises. A 4th one stands at the far end of the genkin, fur raised as it hisses. These 3 are Sake, Mochi, and Noodle, and that one is Bastard. Eraserhead nods at the various cats, and Izuku huffs a breath out of his nose, tempted to crack a smile. He briefly pets the cats while he takes off his shoes, but he's still quick to focus back on Eraser. "Come on, I'll show you where your room is." Eraser waves his hand in a vague gesture that Izuku gathers is supposed to mean, "Follow me." He does, past a decently clean living room and down a hallway, straight into a bedroom that was clearly a guest room. Eraserhead flicks on the lights, and Izuku grimaces at the clean bedspread because he hasn't showered in several days, and there are bits and pieces of dirt and grossness that sometimes flake off of him. "I figure you might want to take a shower," Eraser says, and Izuku is relieved, although a part of him is pretty sure Eraser was quick to offer because Izuku was likely to bring fleas to his cat. Izuku drops his bag on the floor in the corner of the room as Eraser disappears from behind him. Shrugging, Izuku tentatively pushes open the door in the hallway near his room. Bingo. Footsteps sound behind him. "Here, kid." Eraser is holding out a small pile of clothes. "We'll take you to get some actual clothes tomorrow, after school, but for tonight you'll just have to use some of my old ones." Instinctively, Izuku opens his mouth to argue. He doesn't need help. He can take care of himself. Eraser evidently anticipates that, however, because he doesn't even give Izuku a chance to protest. "It wouldn't make any sense to put back the same clothes right after you get clean. I'll wash them and you can wear them tomorrow." Eraser meets Izuku's narrowed eyes with a calm, unwavering gaze. And Izuku can't come up with an argument to that, so he takes the clothes, then shuts himself into the bathroom, ignoring Eraser's offer of showing him the shower controls. It can't be that difficult, and even if it is, he'll figure it out on his own. Taking the shower is, Izuku privately admits in the safety of his own mind, in the top 3 best things that's happened to him since he's left home. He hadn't realised just how dirty he was until he got clean, and he cringed when it took 2 washes to completely clean his hair. Ugh. A small part of Izuku is loath to get out of the shower, but he doesn't know how much hot water the apartment has, and the last thing he wants to do is pointlessly waste it just because he wants to stand in it. He gets out of the shower, wincing at the wet footprints he leaves as he walks to the towel rack. Drying off, Izuku sees a bottle of lotion that's sitting on the counter, and he cannot help but think of Tomura. Closing his eyes, Izuku tilts his head, and when he opens them, he is staring at himself in the mirror. Has he always looked so tired? His hair is still wet, and he likes it better this way, because then the pure snow white of his hair is darkened to a colour that is closer to Tomura's than his father's. Not that he's ever vocalized that thought, obviously. Sentimentality already had no place in their household, much less ridiculous thoughts like that. Shaking his head, Izuku dispels those thoughts from his head. Grabbing the clothes Eraser gave him, he's quick to get dressed, although everything is big on him. The end product, Izuku finds, is that he looks not unlike an elementary kid playing dress-up in their parents' clothes. His eye twitches minutely, momentarily. This whole situation fucking sucks. Living with 2 pro heroes who are also his teachers means Izuku will never have a single moment completely let down his barriers, a single moment to himself. But he will admit that Mike and Eraser are far from the worst living options he could have been stuck with. On that note, though, he would also be the first to point out to Nezu that he is more than capable of simply leaving if he's put with someone he doesn't want to live with. At least they have a cat. A voice, not unlike Tomura's whispers. "But they want to take me shopping. For clothes," Izuku argues back. "Well, it's not like you don't need them," Tomura says snidely. Izuku is more than aware that arguing with himself in his own mind, and personifying one of the side of the arguments to be Tomura is unhealthy at best and mentally unhinged at worst, but that doesn't stop him from doing it. That isn't the point. I don't want to owe them any more than I already do. You're the one who's supposed to believe in heroes, remember? But Tomura doesn't sound sure. I have always agreed that heroes cannot be trusted. Then why are you there right now? Why run to them? Why aren't I good enough to make you stay? How could you leave me? How could you leave me, Izuku? Blinking hard, Izuku swallows and shuts down his pointless arguing with himself. As usual, it has only devolved into his own accusations against himself, and dwelling on those will help nobody, least of all Tomura. There's no telling how long he's just been standing in the bathroom, staring at the mirror, but after the day he's had, Izuku feels that he's quite frankly entitled to it. Exiting the bathroom, he holds his ragged set of clothes out in his hands as he glances around. Here, put them in the washer. Footsteps sound from behind him, and Izuku narrowly avoids jumping. Eraser walks down the hallways and pulls open a sliding wooden screen, revealing a washer and a dryer behind it. Izuku follows, then drops his clothes into the open washer as instructed. Awkwardly, he waits and waits as Eraser fiddles with the dials before filling it with soap and turning it on. You can do whatever, kid. Feel free to watch the TV or use the table for homework. Eraserhead says when he turns back around and sees Izuku still in the hallway. Izuku can't remember the last time he spent time just watching the TV. The closest he ever got was watching Tomura play video games, but that was far more about Tomura than it was the games. Homework, though, that was something he could do. Shuffling into what has been dubbed as his bedroom, Izuku digs through his backpack, wrinkling his nose at touching it now that he's actually clean. He abandons it in his room, bringing his work to the kitchen table as Eraserhead had suggested. Izuku isn't yet sure if Eraser and Mike are the type where suggestions are really orders, so it's best to play it safe until he knows. As the evening wears on, Mike starts cooking at one point, bringing with him noise and energy. The cats follow him in, as well, something that secretly makes Izuku smile, especially seeing as one of them is spectacularly fat. Izuku watches the easy way Eraser and Mike react, how they mold into each other's spaces like it's second nature. The casual touches, a hand on a shoulder, a foot tapping against an ankle. The simple endearment that seems to come to them for actions that Izuku instinctively tenses his muscles at. When Mike is trying to tell Izuku a story about something or other, waving his arms around widely while he does so, he ends up smacking Eraser in the side of his head as the man tries to scoot by him. And Izuku doesn't move, doesn't flinch, because he knows better, but his muscles tense and he is ready. Ready for a fight, ready to run. Because Eraser was hit, and surely there will be retribution for such an act. But Eraser just sighs, rolling his eyes as Mike apologizes sheepishly, glancing at Izuku and telling him this happens all the time. Then Eraser walks on, and Izuku watches incredulously as he goes. It's so painfully obvious that he does not belong here. Izuku is the first to the classroom for their second day of class, although Ida arrived shortly after him. If Izuku didn't have such a tight hold over his reactions, he would have laughed with blatant surprise on Ida's face when he saw he wasn't the first to arrive. Good morning, Shigaraki-kun, Ida says, although it isn't announced with the usual robustness that Izuku can already tell is delivered with almost all of Ida's statements. He nods at Ida a single time, then buries his head back in a book he'd stolen from Eraser and Mike's bookshelf. Fortunately, all the classmates who continue to arrive seem to get the hint and don't try to interact with him. Small mercies. The late bell rings and the class falls silent as Eraser bangs open the door on cue. He surveys the class slowly, and the tension rises almost palpably. Better than yesterday, Eraser finally announces, and it's almost funny the way everyone seems to take a deep breath. Today, you have a task ahead of you. Eraser draws, darting his eyes from student to student. Choose a class president and vice president. With these succinct instructions, Eraserhead zips himself into his sleeping bag and closes his eyes. So mundane, Izuku thinks to himself. Immediately, every voice in the class begins to speak, and Izuku honestly wishes he had a sleeping bag of his own. He turns back to his book, and it isn't until the class went quiet that Izuku tunes in once more, just in time to catch the end of what was probably a long-winded explanation. "And I will collect your votes," Ida yells. Ah, they're voting. Izuku digs in his backpack to find a piece of paper, and is quick to scribble Yayorozu. When he holds out the paper with a bored face, Ida takes it from him without hesitating, which is something, at least, but he does move like he's dealing with the delicacy of a bomb. Behind him, he can hear someone whisper, "Who'd you vote for?" Izuku returns to her journal, ignoring the whisper, because there's almost no reason they'd be talking to him. After a moment, a pencil pokes him in the back, gently, and when Izuku snaps his head around, eyes narrowed, all he sees is the purple kid with the brainwashing quirk staring at him impassively. "Who'd you vote for?" he repeats slowly, and Izuku can't help but be slightly impressed by his audacity. The intent quirk is what Izuku looks at first, but all it tells him is curiosity, resolve, striving, which is oddly unhelpful. "Yayorozu?" he says slowly, like it could be a trap. "That's the girl with the ponytail, right?" the boy mutters, and when Izuku nods, the boy makes an approving face, glancing around the classroom as Ida finishes collecting the paper scraps. "I voted for Suyukun," the kid says, and it takes Izuku a moment to remember that that's the girl with the frog mutation. Izuku nods distractedly. She's definitely one of the better choices among their classmates. After a moment that is far too long for Izuku's comfort, he turns back around slowly, and although he's too well trained to allow his face to reflect it, he's slightly confused. How odd. That Friday, as they leave the apartment, Aizawa tells him that his class is going on a field trip of sorts that day. Izuku isn't exactly thrilled by the news, but he at the very least appreciates Eraserhead warning him, even though he won't give him any additional information. "The main reason I'm telling you," Eraser says, and Izuku can feel worry, trepidation, resignation, fear, "is because All Might, as well as 13, are going to be with our class." Fan-fucking-tastic, Izuku thinks, and then, to make sure there's no confusion on the subject, "Fan-fucking-tastic," he tells Eraserhead. Although Eraserhead sighs, there is no sign of anger, annoyance, rage. He just keeps walking without responding, all the way to the classroom door where he, for once, actually goes inside before the bell rings. As soon as the bell rings, the class falls silent, and Eraser wastes no time. "Change into your hero costumes. We're taking a bit of a field trip today." The brief uproar that arises at his words is quickly silenced when he flashes his quirk. Izuku wants to roll his eyes, even as he stands to go grab his costume case. With the way they act, you wouldn't think these kids were 15 and 16, but rather 11 and 12. All Might is nowhere to be found, not that Izuku is complaining. Regardless, they all change, then head down to the front of the building where a small bus is waiting for them. UA even has its own fucking buses? Seriously? Izuku completely ignores Ida's attempts to shepherd everyone on the bus by seat number, and brushes past the boy entirely, earning himself a shouted reprimand that he also ignores. His classmates settle on the bus, but not without a racket as they do so. Shinso slides into the seat beside him, probably because he's the only one brave enough to do so. Izuku's idly checking his phone and wishing he had thought to bring his book when someone says his name. "Shigaraki-kun, I'd like to say what's on my mind, and you seem to hate the rest of us, kiddo." Suryu, mutation, frog, partial and internal and external, says, looking at Izuku like he isn't actively glowering at her. It's silent, and Izuku realizes everyone is looking at him, waiting for him to respond. It almost makes him laugh. "Well, if you're waiting for me to disagree, sorry, but it's not happening." Harsh. The guy with the bulky elbows, mutation, emitter, tape dispenser, elbow adherent, says, "We're trained to be heroes. Hitting your teammates in the middle of battle is probably going to be counterproductive." Shinso surprisingly pipes up from where Izuku thought he'd been napping. Izuku tilts his head towards Shinso as a form of acknowledgement. "Valid, but I don't have to like any of you to trust you. If we're fighting a villain or whatever, I'll work with you guys, and whoever my teammate was, to the best of my ability, and I certainly wouldn't leave you wounded or injured." Rolling his eyes as Izuku sees several people actually slumped in relief, Izuku adds on, "I just don't want to talk to you recreationally." "Why not, kiddo?" Suyu asks. Izuku gives her an appraising look, one that he then turns to all of his classmates that he can see. because the luxury of naivety most of you have is something I simply can't stomach being around in casual conversation. Everyone on the bus looks at Izuku with a look of fear, confusion, offense, or an interesting mix of the three. Izuku continues. Plus, I'm of the opinion that I would genuinely corrupt your good natures and happy dispositions. What the fuck? The electricity boy whispers, not quite low enough to be unheard. That marks the end of Izuku's contribution to the conversation, and he stays silent for the rest of the short bus ride across campus. The space hero, 13, is waiting for them when they get off the bus and inside the USJ, which Izuku privately admits is impressive. 13 talks to his class about how quirks can be dangerous, how quirks can kill, and Izuku mentally chuckles. That is not a lesson he needs to be taught. In fact, that is a lesson he knows better than the veins on the back of his hand. A sticker catches Izuku's eye, and he immediately snaps his head to look at it. Aizawa catches his movement, and he turns his head to look where Izuku had turned his head. Voices start to murmur, then rise, but Izuku ignores them as he watches a familiar portal grow wide in the plaza of the USJ. Seriously? As Izuku watches his brother and Nanny survey the USJ, he sighs, long and slow, a headache starting to form. This is going to be embarrassing, he can already tell. Aizawa looks at him, and the second he clocks the long-suffering expression on Izuku's face, his own tense expression changes into one of vague exasperation. You have to be joking, he says dryly. I'm just as upset as you are, Izuku reassures him, although neither of them show any outward signs of distress. The huge, growing group of villains makes Aizawa tense, though, and Izuku clocks the moment he shifts from Aizawa to Eraserhead. No one down there will hesitate to attack anyone here, Izuku says, just in case Eraserhead happened to have any delusions about how this is going to work. Red eyes stare at him briefly before Eraser slides on his goggles and readies his capture weapon. 13, Eraser calls. Protect the students. Izuku hears someone asking something about whether this is part of the exercise, and he resists the urge to turn around and call them a variety of creative names. Instead, when Eraser leaps off the top of the stairs, Izuku takes off running in the same direction, ignoring the calls of his name coming from his classmates. His target is waiting for him, pale red eyes unblinking and unmoving as they watch him. Izuku aches because he has missed seeing them. Little brother, Tomura greets him, arms spread out wide, and Izuku can tell there's a smile underneath the embalmed hand on his face. It's more endearing than he will ever admit. Shigaraki Izuku. Kurogiri bows, and never mind, Izuku kind of wants to kill himself now. This is going to cause so many problems. What are you doing here? Izuku massages his forehead. Maybe I missed you, Tomura grumbles, dropping his pose, and Izuku sighs, shoulders slumping. It isn't the same without you around. So you decide to invade my school and attack my classmates. Izuku raises an eyebrow, but his anger is already slipping away. I gave no kill orders. Tomura waves his hand dismissively. And the Nomu? Izuku glares at the hulking creature standing behind Tomura, not that it was hard to miss. Tomura shrugs, unconcerned. No, that's to kill All Might. To kill All Might? Izuku repeats incredulously. He's surprised when Tomura gives him a look like he's stupid, as he's used to giving that look to others. You know that sensei wouldn't have wanted me to come if I didn't have an objective to complete. The slip-up doesn't go unnoticed by Izuku, but it serves as a burning reminder as to why he's fighting. To save Tomura. I wish you would just come with me, Tomu-chan, Izuku says, because he has to try at least once. You'd be safe here, let me save you. Tomura huffs a breath that could be a sigh or a laugh. That's not one of the choices here, Izuku. My character wasn't made to be saved. Not expecting anything else, Izuku may not be surprised, but he is disappointed. But then again, he'd been disappointed a lot recently. One day I will rewrite the code for the game. Tomura dips his head a little, and Izuku can't see what expression he's making. But it doesn't really matter anyway, because they both know there's only one thing left for them to do in this situation. Well, Tomu-chan, Izuku says, and a grin almost teasing grows on his face as he shifts into a fighting stance. I hope you won't hold it against me when I win. Oh, Izu. Tomura sighs, lowering himself in a crouch, slipping his father's hand into his pocket so he can make full eye contact with Izuku. If Izuku didn't know any better, he'd almost think Tomura looks sad. I could never hold anything against you, not even leaving me. And for just a moment, Izuku's expression shatters like ice, and he looks stricken, heartbroken at Tomura's words. From afar, Aizawa watches the entire interaction as he takes out small-time thugs, and as he does, he thinks he's trying to put together the puzzle that makes up his twisted and broken student. Izuku opens his mouth, but he never gets a chance to say what, he doesn't even know, as Tomura lunges at him, fondness in his eyes and palms spread out wide. In the time it takes to think, Izuku has jerked to the side, swiftly pulling out matching knives from hidden areas in his suit. Tomura and Izuku have always been forced to play for full stakes, every time, and this is no different. And later, those of his classmates who witnessed any piece of the fight will only have one thing to say about it. And it was that their classmate was fighting against the leader of the villains with everything in him, and that Shigaraki Izuku was the only one who had been a match for the leader until All Might arrived. Todoroki Shoto stared impassively at the detective. Shigaraki looked like he had every intention to kill the man with the hands on him. But I did notice something. What's that? Tsukauchi prompts. The man made of mist. He called the main villain Shigaraki Tomura, and he made no move to hurt or even touch Shigaraki, the one from my class. Tsukauchi keeps his face blank, resisting the urge to sigh. Thank you, Todoroki-kun. That's very helpful information. Todoroki shallowly bows his head before getting up and leaving the room. When I brainwashed the villains and asked them questions, they told me something weird. Shinso Itoshi's eyes darted across the room, occasionally landing back on the detective. What did they tell you, Shinso-kun? Tsukauchi asks, glancing at the tape recorder sitting on the table between them. They said that they were under orders not to kill any of us. Shinso looks vaguely unnerved. No fatal injuries, or else they... Shinso licks his lips nervously, eyes darting to Tsukauchi, then away again. Or they'd be killed themselves. This is all very helpful. Thank you, Shinso-kun. Tsukauchi scribbles something on the notepad in front of him. Izuku sits once again in Nezu's office, this time with a mandatory set of quirks pressing cuffs on him at All Might's insistence. Nezu himself is of course there, as is All Might, Recovery Girl, 13, Eraserhead and Present Mic. They're mainly waiting on Tsukauchi, Izuku knows, but All Might seems all too happy to take full reign as the time ticks by. This is exactly what I feared, All Might roared, steam rising off his buffed-up form. Izuku has to actively work not to roll his eyes. He led them right to us. What do you mean, led? Izuku says, raising an eyebrow, all snark despite the situation. Literally the entire country knows you're teaching here. He didn't deny it, All Might yells, way too loudly, pointing a dramatic finger at Izuku and completely ignoring Izuku's point. For fuck's sake, would you sit down? Eraserhead snaps, jerking All Might into his seat right as he deflates, coughing up blood. You're already far past your limit. What on earth do you think you're doing? Recovery Girl scolds, scuttling to All Might's side, lightning fast. The boy! All Might doesn't get much further before coughing up blood. Again. I already know, Izuku groans, sinking as low in his chair as he can go. Do you seriously think All for One didn't figure out you had a time limit? All Might looks like the entire world just got shattered. So much so that Izuku would feel bad if it were anyone else, anyway. As it is, it's All Might, so Izuku just fully rolls his eyes this time. I already told you guys, my dad is actively trying to convince me over to his side. I wouldn't be surprised if he's taken the tactic of making the hero suspicious of me, so that I'll hate you guys and come running back to him because I have nowhere else to go. There are mixed reactions to Izuku's explanation, and Izuku knows it's going to be a long night. A likely story, All Might intones, although his tone isn't as impressive without his bulk to back it up. That makes sense, Eraserhead says, not moving from the firm stance he's taken behind Izuku's chair. Present Mic, touchingly, hasn't left his side either, literally, and with the two of them backing him up, Izuku is almost left feeling like he has loving parents. Almost. The sound of teeth grinding together is not enough to be impressive, and Izuku spares a brief moment to ponder the possibility of All Might cracking his own teeth. Your tricks do not fool me. Rolling his eyes so hard it almost jolts his head, Izuku sighs overly loudly. For the last time, there are literally no tricks. All Might, no one is trying to fool you. I'm not here to kill anyone or spy on UA or whatever other idea you've gotten into your head. There is a moment of silence where the room sits, stuck in stagnation. Villains do not become heroes, All Might finally intones, and Izuku can see that he just isn't saying the words, but that he truly believes what he's saying, that he simply can't comprehend anything else. And it makes him mad, makes him angry, because all Izuku has ever wanted was to be a hero. All he's ever wanted was to be something other than the thing he was created for, to save lives instead of end them. Who is All Might to call him a liar, to tell him he cannot? Izuku stares down in his lap, his hands clenched in fists without conscious thought. Rage beats with his heart, and it starts to cloud his thoughts. How dare All Might say that to him? How dare a man who can barely stand on his own try and tell Izuku what he's capable of? You know, All Might, Izuku says easily, casually, almost happily. I'm curious about something. And there's something off with the way he talks. Something wrong with his tone, and it makes the people in the room glance at him with trepidation. How would you kill me? Izuku asks pleasantly, and the whole room makes various noises of shock. Would you Detroit smash my head into the ground? Izuku asks, his voice going high and mocking when he says the name of All Might's favorite move. Like you did my dad? The energy in the room grows sickly, like it's sucking the life out of everything that moves. All Might blanches, and for a moment he almost looks like a normal hero when he starts to sputter some sort of denial. No! Izuku interrupts with a grin too wide for his face. I'm everyone's son, remember? I'm the bad guy. I'm everything wrong with this world. A hysterical giggle leaves Izuku's mouth, and the adults in the room grow more and more disturbed. You'd have to kill me, you know. I could steal everyone's quirk in this room in mere seconds. Izuku's teeth gleam like pearls that have been sharpened into daggers, and his voice is high and joyful. Fuck my dreams, fuck my aspirations, fuck everything I've tried so hard to be. I've got to be stopped. The grin melts off his face and the tone drops. So, how would you kill me? Complete silence suffocates the room, and a sight of silence creates a physical barrier between Izuku and the others, something impossible to bypass. He refuses to look away from the conflicting expression on All Might's face. You made it clear there's no other option for me, Izuku continues to press, refusing to let up. And if I'm a villain, you'll have to fight me. If you were willing to kill all for one, you should be willing to kill me. We've got the same quirk after all. Who's to say I won't grow up and become just like him, right? All Might is no longer looking at Izuku, but Izuku's eyes are burning into the side of All Might's head. I'm waiting, All Might. Another moment of silence, where several open their mouths to step in, but like Izuku can sense it, he says, Don't fussy out now. You had a lot of shit to say to me a second ago. Tell me how you'd kill me. Say it! Eraserhead's hand grips onto Izuku's shoulder. Whether to reel him in or ground him, Izuku doesn't know. Blood leaks out of All Might's mouth as he stares at the ground, his hands curled into loose fists. Izuku pauses and takes a deep breath. There are a million hurtful things he can think of to say in the moment. A million things that'll either enrage All Might or tear him apart. Things about Nana, things about Tomura, things about his father. But Izuku wants to be a hero, so he doesn't. Instead, he says in a voice that's gone deceptively soft, Don't worry, All Might. You'll never have to make that decision. I won't let you. Tired and broken blue eyes look up and meet Izuku's, and a vicious anger rears up in Izuku as he bites. I'll kill myself before I let myself bad by your filthy fucking hands. Several exclamations of noise from various people erupt, but Izuku's eyes don't move from All Might, who doesn't say a word and just stares. At the same time, the door opens and Detective Tsukauchi finally arrives. Right in the middle of the commotion, a startled look on his face. What's going on? He asks, and is completely ignored. After a moment, Recovery Girl grabs All Might and pulls him out of the office, presumably to the infirmary. Tsukauchi watches them go, then turns back to the room, eyes immediately falling on the spot in the room that is radiating rage. And of course, at its apex, stands Izuku. Tsukauchi sighs to himself. He has the unfortunate feeling that he and this kid are going to get remarkably familiar with each other very quickly. Nezu spots him first. Detective, he says brightly, immediately drawing everyone's eyes to him. I hope now is a good time, Tsukauchi says diplomatically, mostly for a lack of anything else to say. Of course, Nezu says, and it does nothing to dispel the tense atmosphere. All right, Tsukauchi says, walking over to Izuku. Shigaraki-kun, I'm going to interview you about the invasion of the USJ. Izuku says nothing, and he just watches Tsukauchi with cold green eyes as the detective sits down, pulling out the same disc recorder he'd used the first time they met. After he presses start on the recorder and says the introductory words, Tsukauchi finally looks at Izuku. All right, Shigaraki-kun, can you please recount how the USJ invasion happened from your perspective? This is so fucking tedious. I saw one of Kurogiri's portals open in the plaza, and I immediately alerted Eraserhead, and confirmed his hypothesis that it was my brother and caregiver. Izuku massaged one of his thumbs with his other hand. Call me, he wants to go to sleep. Then I went down there immediately to talk to Tomura. And what did you talk about? Tsukauchi asks, and it makes a wave of visceral rage wash over Izuku that's so strong he's taken almost by surprise. Does everyone really have to be present for this? He says, gesturing to the peanut gallery in the office. Nezu hums. Is there a problem, Shigaraki-kun? The willpower it takes for Izuku not to flip his lid then and there could power a generator. Yeah, actually, I don't want or need anyone but the detective to know what my brother spoke to me about. It was private, and I highly resent being made to share personal details about my life, more than I already have with you people. There are very few people in this office, Nezu points out, peering at Izuku with eyes that Izuku can't read. And I assure you that nothing said here will leave this office. His teeth grind against each other. That isn't my point. Nezu doesn't even bother to respond, and Izuku nearly shakes with anger, because he knows what Nezu wants him to admit, and he knows that Nezu would probably send out the others if he did too. If he admitted that he doesn't want to feel vulnerable, doesn't want to feel pitied, anything along those lines, any of those weaknesses laid bare would serve just fine as a sacrifice. His jaw sets. Nezu could go fuck himself, because Izuku doesn't bend to anyone. Tomura told me he sent out no-kill orders to the invaders. Izuku abruptly says, not looking away from Nezu. And he said he sent the gnome to kill All Might because father wouldn't have let him come otherwise. The actual reason, Izuku continues before anyone can ask, that he showed up at all was because he missed me, evidently. I offered to help him, Izuku growls, because it will always be easier to be angry than it is to be sad. And he said there's no way to help him. He said he would never blame me for anything, even for... And it's not that Izuku gets choked up, really. It's just that he doesn't want to have to be the one to say the word out loud. Even for leaving him. Izuku finishes, his voice lowering back down but growing no less strong. His fists are clenched so tightly he can barely feel his fingers. That is what we talked about. Thank you, Tsukauchi says after a pause. Then, Izuku pushes through because he's so fucking done with it all. I fought him with my knives as he tried to disintegrate me until All Might eventually managed to show up, which is when he and Kurogiri teleported away. You're just a kid, Tsukauchi can't seem to stop himself from saying, paling when Izuku says he fought Tomura, and the notion is so absurd that Izuku chuckles to himself. And there's something about the way he does, something that's borderline horrifying about the action. Maybe it's the way he genuinely seems to think it's funny, as if such a statement could only be a joke. Or it could be how out of place the laugh sounds coming out of such a dreary kid's mouth. Regardless, Izuku laughs, and the room quiets, filled with unease. Oh, detective, I haven't been a kid in a long, long time. It's after Izuku says this that someone makes a mistake. Someone who thinks they have all the clues to the crossword and they haven't even figured out they're supposed to be putting together a puzzle. Listen, Shigaraki-kun, I know you've had it rough, but you're young and the heroes understand the tough circumstances you were in, 13 says, speaking up for the first time. Shut up! Izuku suddenly cuts in, voice low and dangerous. Just shut the fuck up. Shocked faces cover the room, but there's tenseness uncutting all of them. Every one of them suddenly remembering far too late that this kid was raised by the most powerful, terrifying villain of the quirk century. My pain doesn't matter, Izuku snarls more than he says, and neither does any of yours, quite frankly. Pain is a distraction and an excuse. It has nothing to do with who or what I am, because you know what? A sick sort of sadness creeps into the atmosphere of the room. My life has fucking sucked. I've been beaten down in every sense of the word, and I've seen things that will haunt me for the rest of my fucking life. I've had to do things I will never stop dreaming about. There's an emotion on almost every face in the room, something like horror and regret and agony that all come together to make a terrorized facial expression, but Izuku was not done. I have had to walk away knowing that I was saving myself but leaving him behind. Izuku stopped abruptly, inhaling deeply, pulling himself back together. He blinked, and the pieces that had begun to come undone were back together. But it doesn't matter. Izuku stares all of them down, eyes cold and empty. Someone else out there has had it worse than me, and another person had it worse than they did. Trauma doesn't make you special. It never has, and it never will. And when everyone in the room looks back at Izuku, they see a boy much older than them all. Save your excuses for someone who wants them, Izuku says, and it isn't even angry anymore, just tired. I am not so pathetic that I need to be exonerated of my actions just so I can lie to myself and everyone around me. Was that all you needed, detective? Izuku spits acidly as he turns to the detective. Yeah, that was all. Tsukauchi starts fumbling with the recorder as Izuku turns to Nezu. So may I go home now, Principal? Izuku asks, his voice so sweet it makes everyone in the room flinch, jingling the quirk cuffs that are still on his wrists. Nezu is unfazed. Yes, thank you, Shigaraki-kun. He holds out a key, and although Izuku wants nothing more than to snatch the key from his paws and unlock the cuffs himself, he has more common sense than that, so he merely breathes as he holds his arms out, waiting for the principal to unlock one cuff at a time. Aizawa is waiting by the door, and Izuku nearly feels grateful for the man as he surges past him without saying another word to anyone in the office.
Chapter 5. Fuck the Gov, or something like that. There's a wave of curiosity and aggressiveness coming from a group of people that Izuku can tell must be hovering right outside the classroom, and he sighs to himself. What a pain in the ass. He hasn't moved from his chair as he debates with himself whether it's worth it to just hop out of the window and avoid what is sure to be an annoying encounter that'll only raise his blood pressure. Shigaraki-kun? Shinso's voice, smooth and hypnotic by design, comes from behind him, and he turns around with an eyebrow raised. What do you know that I don't? Shinso asks, in what could almost be considered a teasing tone of voice, his face inexpressive but his eyes shining. Izuku considers him for a brief moment before he decides to indulge him. There's a mob of angry students waiting outside the door. Shinso immediately slumps over onto his desk like a puppet without strings. He proceeds to groan long and loud, not unlike a dying cow. It nearly makes Izuku laugh. Nearly. What the fuck? He mumbles into his desk, drawing out the last word. I was contemplating jumping out of the window, Izuku tells him, then, immediately after, wonders why he said that. To escape, he adds belatedly. Sitting back up, Shinso leans forward, his tired eyes staring into Izuku's. Now that's an idea I can get behind. Unfortunately, a dry voice says behind Shinso, causing him to yelp and jerk around. The windows are made of fortified glass that even Present Mic cannot break at his highest frequency. Izuku looks up into the unamused stare of Aizawa-san. I'm sure I could think of a way. Aizawa must realize that Izuku is serious because his quirk flares for a moment. Problem, child? No. I'll leave you to deal directly with Nezu if you break a window. The threat does make Izuku slump because he knows Aizawa will follow through. I'm one of the most powerful beings in Japan, and yet I'm not allowed to jump through the window, he muses to himself silently. Inwardly shrugging, Izuku stands up and goes to lean down and grab his backpack, There's no point in lingering around now that he knows there's only one way out after all. A loud commotion from the door snatches his attention, and a brief flick of his eyes confirms that someone has opened the door to the classroom, and his classmates are now staring down a crowd of students who are boxing them in. Ida starts saying something loudly enough to be borderline yelling, his hands chopping and nearly taking out several people. What was certainly a chastisement is not taken well by the crowd, and voices raised, getting louder. No one is going to be moving anytime soon, for fuck's sake. Izuku leans back up, bending his neck to the side. As he does, a loud crack, sounding. Do I have to do everything myself? His approach is more than enough to send his classmates skittering out of his way, leaving the way clear for him to approach the mob of idiots crowding the hallway. Shinso, oddly close behind him. A blonde boy at the front, DNA contact, emitter, copy, time limitation, sneers at him. Izuku makes an immediate note not to let him touch him, even if he is curious about whether or not the kid will be able to copy every quirk he currently has, or just his original. What's the problem? Izuku says loudly. Immediately the blonde kid is more than happy to take the lead. The problem, he declares, pointing a finger at Izuku, is that Class 1A has arrogantly grabbed the spotlight. I suppose you're talking about the villain attack on the USJ? Izuku says calmly, which seems to throw the boy off a little. Regardless, he seems more than capable of hyping himself up, because he regains steam, puffing his chest out. Yes, that's right, but I'm here to tell you that Class 1B is going to show all of you up at the sports festival, so all of you better keep your eyes open, because before you know it, Class 1B will be stealing the spotlight from beneath you. Clap, clap, clap. Wow! Izuku draws as he slow claps. Really cool speech. I mean, I'm nearly shaking. Red flushes up the blonde's face, but Izuku is far from done. He takes a step forward, pressing closer to the crowd, and lets his hands fall down by his sides. However, I gotta say, I'm pretty fucking curious about something. The sudden curse makes several people flinch, as does the way the fake smile that Izuku is wearing slides off his face. What do you think a villain attack is? Izuku takes another step forward, and the look on his face is hard and flat now. The look someone wears when they don't care if you live or die. The boy takes a step back. You seem to think it was similar to the media crowding the gate the other day. You seem to think that the villains, Izuku suddenly snarls, and the entire crowd flinches, moving back as one. We're carrying around fucking cameras. You seem to think they were lining up for our autographs. Izuku's cold eyes narrowed, and he moved, genuine anger in his chest. Just to make sure you understand the concept, let me tell you what fucking happened. The crowd has backed up enough that they aren't as condensed anymore, but Izuku doesn't stop advancing on the blonde boy, who's staring at him just like someone does when they realize they've made a great miscalculation. We were scattered by a teleportation quirk, and left in groups of 2 and 3, no adults, no methods of communication, no information on what the hell was happening. 10 or more villains were in every location, waiting to fight the students. The leader had a giant mutant creature which was powered to defeat All Might that had powers of regeneration. Izuku did not feel the need to share all the private details he was privy to, such as the fact that the leader had issued no-kill orders. Imagine being a student, somehow managing to fight off a group of villains and surviving. Then, imagine. Izuku let his lip curl up, hatred in his eyes in a way that made the blonde flinch back hard enough to hit the wall of the hallway. Being told it was our fault, and that we did it for attention. That wasn't what I meant, the kid managed to rasp, and Izuku rolled his eyes, dismissing him and the incident entirely as he bothers to say, I'm sure, as parting words. He turned around, ignoring the way the crowd had scattered around him like an explosion, and the way all of his classmates were staring at him. Surprisingly, Shinso was waiting for him, holding his backpack out in one hand. Thanks, Izuku said, shrugging it on, then turning to head to the lunchroom. The way people jerked out of his way would be funnier if they didn't look so terrified. Instead of funny, though, it's just fucking pathetic. But that's just Izuku's opinion. Who knows what the others are thinking? Something that sounds a lot like monster. Mind if I sit? Shinso appears next to where Izuku is eating alone at the end of a lunch table. Izuku cuts his eyes over to him and shrugs. Shinso must take that answer as a yes, because he pulls out the chair next to Izuku and slides into it. Once again, Izuku reaches out for the intent quirk, more out of habit than anything else. Shinso's behavior confuses him, after all, and Izuku does not like being confused. Intrigue, stubbornness, friendship, attraction. Wait, what? Izuku surges back into the intent quirk, even as he automatically continues to eat. He must have felt the wrong strand, surely. Focusing in on Shinso, Izuku slowed down and peered at the brightest colored strings that represented how Shinso felt towards Izuku. Plucking one, Izuku looked into it. Intrigue, watching Izuku's 5 fingers pass over Uraraka's shoulder, catching the sight of hatred in his eyes when the number 1 hero speaks. The class watching Izuku spar with Aizawa and keep up. Izuku on the first day of school as the class finds out about his quirk. Izuku vanishing after class, catching sight of Izuku staring off into space with eyes full of longing. Looking out, Izuku peers into another, a feeling he can't name welling up in him. Stubbornness, following Izuku as he dashed through the hallways to lunch, ignoring the suspicious glance on Izuku's face as he speaks to him, arguing against Izuku's views on the bus to the USJ, gritting his teeth as they spar, starting conversation after conversation after conversation. There's a hint of a smile on Izuku's face before he wipes it off, diving into the third thread. Friendship, partnering for an English project. Shinso resting his head on the table and smiling as Izuku snorted, walking next to each other in comfortable silence. Shinso glancing at Izuku and rolling his eyes as All Might speaks, and catching the delighted look on Izuku's face before he can wipe it away. Right now as he sits next to Izuku as they eat lunch in easy silence. Pushing away the friendship strand, his chest tight, Izuku looks at the last bright strand. There are plenty of other, thinner and paler threads, of course, but those aren't as reliable. Izuku looks into the last strand and sees attraction, a half-open green eye peering out from beneath white hair. Shinso turning around in the locker room and catching a glimpse of Izuku's bare back and shoulders. Izuku breathing heavily and leaning over Shinso after winning another spar. Izuku approaching the blonde boy with anger in every step he takes. Gasping, Izuku yanks his head out of the attraction strand and then surfaces from the intent quirk altogether. He blinks, suddenly finding himself looking down at a half-eaten tray of food. His heart suddenly beating much faster than it was a minute ago. His hands tremble just barely. Shigaraki-kun? Snapping his head to the side, Izuku sees that Shinso has tilted his head to glance at him out of the corner of his eye. He hides concern well, but Izuku can tell nonetheless. No. A voice that sounds like his own echoes in Izuku's head. Forget about what you saw. None of that matters, and it will only distract both you and him. You want him to succeed, don't you? And don't forget... Izuku inhales. Sorry, something went down the wrong way. Shinso's look lingers for a second longer, then leaves. Whatever, man. You cannot afford to fail. The voice finishes, and Izuku knows that he is right. Too much is at stake for him to be worrying about things like a high schooler's feelings. Feelings are fickle, a high schooler's even more. Shinso's thoughts and feelings will fade in a few weeks, and everything will go back to how it should be. The sports festival is already ruining Izuku's day, and he only woke up 5 minutes ago. You're being dramatic, a dry voice says as Izuku lies his face down in his bed, slowly suffocating into his pillow. A long groan is the only answer Aizawa receives. It's only an hour earlier than you usually get up, Izuku-kun. Ignoring the fact that Aizawa is right, Izuku makes a vague effort in wiggling around for a moment, only to flop into stillness a second later when his wiggling doesn't get him magically out of bed. I'm gonna let Izashi get a picture of you if you don't get up, Aizawa threatens, and Izuku's head jolts up. That is a very real threat, he learned, and he'd also learned that Hisashi had no qualms about printing out photos of Izuku and putting them on his desk next to equally random and ugly photos of Aizawa. It was not heartwarming, and it was in fact embarrassing and ruining his reputation. With that very real threat on mind, Izuku forces himself out of bed, mentally cursing Aizawa the entire time. It was still odd to hear his given name from Aizawa, but he didn't regret giving him and Yamada permission to use it a couple of days ago. They had told him that he could call them Hisashi and Shota, but that was a hard pass. For now. The three of them arrive at school early, and Izuku is left to wander as Aizawa and Yamada are immediately wrapped up in finishing details for the sports festival. Fortunately, he doesn't have to wait long until his classmates begin to show up, and, before long, Yamada, or Present Mic right now, peeks his head into the classroom and tells him to head down to the stadium locker rooms to change. Izuku is already changed and leaning his head against the wall, eyes closed, when he senses someone walk up to him. Cracking his eyes open, he meets 2 different colored eyes, both of them just as fat and emotionless as Izuku's. Can I help you? Izuku says dryly, when Todoroki just stands there, staring for an awkwardly long period of time. Another pause, and then, with no introduction whatsoever, I can tell we're similar, the two of us, but still. Todoroki clenches his fist. I am stronger and I will beat you. Call me, and Izuku thought his social skills were lacking. There is silence for the briefest moment, but just as the room goes to get loud, everyone with something to say, Izuku responds with a look of disdain. Why do you think I give a shit? Excuse me? The abrupt change on Todoroki's face to confusion would almost be funny if this whole exchange weren't so annoying. Izuku straightens up from the wall, looking fully at Todoroki, his eyes twitching. You heard me. I don't care. What? There's mutters coming from the other people now, but Izuku continues, his temper rising. We're fucking 15, Todoroki, and this is a school festival. Last week, real villains invaded campus. This isn't that fucking serious to me, but Aizawa told me I couldn't opt out. The room gapes at Izuku, as if the very idea of purposely not participating in the sports festival is blasphemy. Todoroki looks like his world is crumbling, but Izuku doesn't have time to sugarcoat things for him. So you can chill out with your edgelord routine? Shinso has to slap a hand over his mouth when Izuku says this, because I could truly not give less of a fuck. The UA Sports Festival is something I consider to be a representation of the biggest faults of Hero Society, and it's a waste of my time. Ida looks like he's actually about to pass out, and more than one person is just staring aghast at Izuku like he's spoken sudden and complete nonsense. Why are you acting like this is unexpected? Kaminari suddenly pops up as the room sits in silence. Come on guys, it totally fits that Shigaraki-kun would say something like that. This breaks the frozen layer of ice Izuku has put over the room, and a couple of weak chuckles ring out. Movement starts up again, and everyone finishes locking away their belongings and straightening out their clothes. Shinso slides up to Izuku, a glint in his eye. I can't believe you called Todoroki-kun an edgelord. He snorts, and it's only from input with his intent quirk, attraction, amusement, worry, stubbornness, respect, friendship, that keeps Izuku from walking away completely in frustration. Unlike most others, Shinso tends to have more than one intention when he comes to talk to Izuku. And if Izuku ignores the intent of friendship, if he pretends it's a fluke or a misread, if he's convinced no one will ever see him as more than a monster, a weapon, well, then no one will ever know. Today is such a waste of time, Izuku says, with no inflection in his voice and no expression on his face. A single pat on his shoulder startles Izuku, who darts narrowed eyes over to an unsympathetic Shinso. It's just a couple hours. Power through. Shinso is right, Izuku reflects, so he only nods, then heads to the group of their class that's standing in one of the tunnel entrances, waiting to be introduced onto the field. Around him is chaos as his classmates frantically exchange tips, worry, and hype each other up in equal measure. Ida is shouting and trying to corral everyone, which, of course, makes things twice as bad. Part of Izuku mentally checks out of the whole thing, and he's not even remotely listening to whatever's being said as Present Mic officially starts the sports festival. He follows his class when they go out, eyes alert, but mind glazed over. And for the sports festival introduction speech, we have Shigaraki Izuku, the highest scorer in the entrance exam. Midnight calls, one hand propped on her hip and the other held out vaguely towards the cluster of students. Huh. They didn't tell him he'd be doing this. Ugh. Maybe in the hero exam, Izuku can hear someone say with annoyance. Izuku's eyes narrow as he moves forward and walks up the stairs to the podium. He taps the mic a single time, and when he's sure it's working, the first thing he does is look directly at the student he heard speaking before. Actually, no. Not just the hero exam. The academic exam as well. The student in question, fox, ears, nose, tail, hearing, sense, amplifier, sensory, smell, flushes red. Izuku looks away from her and surveys the crowd. Sorry, that was a personal question I wanted to answer before I began. They didn't tell me I'd be making this speech, so forgive me if I seem a little unprepared. Izuku says with a grin so sweet it's sickly. Since I don't have any prepared words of advice or wisdom, I will instead briefly give you all my thoughts on the sports festival. The crowd is undoubtedly focused intensely on Izuku and his incredible unconventional speech. Izuku hides a smirk, all of his classmates pale, except for Shinso, who looks like Christmas came early. I think the UA Sports Festival is one of the most damaging things to the societal idea of heroes, and the images it perpetuates of who and what a hero must be is problematic and borderline discriminatory. Watching every single face around him turn into a mask of shock, confusion, anger, and fear is a high Izuku will never forget. Midnight goes pale after he finishes his first sentence, and lunges forward to grab the mic from him, but he ducks and slides back, because he isn't quite finished. Even if we ignore the very obvious problem of being skewed to emitter and strength quirks, the sports festival instills the idea of a ranking system and a rivalry among your comrades early on. Midnight's smile is very fake, and her eyes rage at Izuku, who feels cheeky enough to wink at her, He doesn't want to be doused with sleeping gas, so he's almost out of time. I'm short on time, but you should all think about how wise it would be to be taught to fight the people who are on your side instead of the criminals and villains you pledged to stop. Just as Midnight's hand goes for her sleeve, Izuku tosses the mic to her, and with this silence comes an absolute outroar of noise from the crowd, and from the students below. Izuku is quick to dart to the steps and slip back into the student crowd before Midnight can think about doing anything funny, and although his classmates flinch away from him, he catches more than one face thinking. Izuku doesn't realize he's moved back to Shinso's side automatically until he's there, but the elbow he gets to his side, paired with a wide, slightly unhinged grin, makes Izuku wonder if this is what having a friend feels like. Yamada is shouting something over the loudspeakers with enthusiasm, and then Midnight is spinning a wheel, her smile still plastic. They are clearly trying to move past his speech as fast as possible. Izuku knows Yamada is being ordered to, and besides, lingering on it would do no good. The message has been planted in people's minds. Izuku ignores whatever is being called out. He doesn't need to know. He moves with the crowd to the starting position, and, riding off the adrenaline high that comes from pissing off a stadium of 10,000 people, tugs Shinso's sleeve. Good luck, he says slowly. Then, lets go and pushes him forward as he stays behind. A long silence, then a horn blares. Go! Yamada yells. Everyone starts to move, and Izuku stays completely still. He's more than aware he could sweep the entire festival with a little effort, but, quite frankly, he just doesn't fucking want to. This is why he doesn't move as everyone, even general and business course students, make at least a vague effort to walk the course. He ignores Yamada's call of, Shigaraki Izuku of Class 1A still hasn't moved. Could this be some sort of complex strategy? Izuku does allow himself to smirk at Aizawa's response, however, which is a dry, based on his speech, I doubt it. There's a noise from the crowd, noise from the commentation, but the entire time, Izuku doesn't so much as take a step forward. And when it's been announced that the first 41 people have passed the finish line, ending the first race, Izuku turns around and walks off the field without so much as a backward glance. Somewhere, in the back of a dark, dank bar, Shigaraki Tomura laughs so hard he nearly falls off his bar stool, and, far below him, a man centuries old ponders his son's actions. Chapter 6. Shoto is fucking with you guys. Somehow, the fact he has to choose a hero name was something that completely slipped Izuku's mind, and it wasn't until Midnight was standing in front of the class that he remembered, oh, right, I actually need one of those. Chattering breaks out across the classroom, as people immediately turn to their friends, trading ideas and giving suggestions. At some point, everyone starts presenting, and most names get passed without trouble, although Aoyama does have to shorten his. Alien Queen, Mina beams, and although Izuku is only halfway paying attention, he catches the frown that grows on Midnight's face. Vetoed, she declares immediately, and Izuku snaps his head over to watch the proceedings. What? Mina cries, a few classmates echoing her. Too scary. Midnight waves a hand through the air. Mina's mouth twists, but she leaves the podium and starts to go back to her seat without another word, and the entire interaction is annoying enough that Izuku feels the need to intervene. Your title is literally the R-rated hero, Izuku says dryly, and every head in the classroom swivels to stare at him. Midnight opens her mouth, but Izuku isn't finished talking. Your title cuts off an entire demographic of the population, he says ruthlessly. The demographic heroes are most popular among, I want to add. The silence is oppressive, but Izuku still has more to add. This time, though, he turns to look over all of his classmates. Besides, only the commission can actually deny a hero name or a title. Cutting his eyes back to Midnight, who looks like someone just shoved a lemon into her mouth, Izuku lets his lip curl just slightly. Our teacher forgot to mention that this can be advisement only. Dead fucking silence. Bro is always hardcore, Kaminari whispers, making both Sero and Kirishima clap their hands over their mouths to avoid laughing out loud. Shinso snorts quietly behind Izuku, and Midnight screws her face into a vaguely pleasant smile that would probably work on most people. The annoyance and spite he can feel from his intent quirk tells Izuku otherwise. Thank you for your input, Shigaraki-kun, she simpers, her eye twitching only a minuscule amount. And Izuku must be spending too much time around his classmates, because he immediately responds without thinking, a smile spread too wide across his face. Anything for a classmate, Midnight-sensei. He watches her nails curl into her hand before she visibly takes a deep breath and relaxes. And your name? Standing up, Izuku walks to the front of the classroom before turning his whiteboard around. Maverick, he says. The impossible hero. Without waiting for a reaction or response, Izuku walks back to his seat, and Midnight doesn't say anything at all to him, presumably because she's already aware that whatever she has to say will not be well received. Although Izuku immediately categorizes the names his classmates put forward in his mind, because he knows he'll need them in the field, the only other hero name he reacts to is Shinso's, offering him a brief thumbs up with an expressionless face. Aizawa emerges from his sleeping bag after midnight leaves, and passes out a series of packets to every student. Choices are due by Friday for approval, and final choices are due on Monday. Once Aizawa's done speaking, conversations immediately spring up, everyone comparing offers and asking for opinions and advice. Izuku can't help but be surprised when he sees he's gotten 8 internship offers. This is mainly because anyone watching the sports festival will be left with no idea of what his quirk was or how it worked, and most people viewed taking on a student with an unknown quirk to be a liability, especially in this field of work. Of course, some of that was explained by the nature of who submitted the offers, and, Izuku noted, scrolling his eyes down the paper, nearly half of the offers were UA faculty. Eraserhead, Present Mic, and Snipe were all on the list, 2 of which Izuku had expected. Something thin and sharp pokes Izuku's back. When he turns around, Shinso is staring blankly at him, as if he's not holding a pen mid-air, clearly ready to continue. "You got any offers?" he asks. 8. You? Izuku turns around completely, straddling his chair backwards so he can talk to Shinso more easily. 32, Shinso shrugged. That had actually been a little higher than the number Izuku had expected, since although Shinso had made it past the first round of the 1v1s in the festival, he had never used his quirk. Of course, neither of them held a candle to Todoroki, who failed to react in any way to the astounding 3,251 offers he received, or even Ida, who, for some reason, also failed to react to the impressive 341 offers he got. In fact, Izuku noticed, narrowing his eyes, Ida wasn't reacting to anything at all, and was providing the bare minimum to his friends who were trying to pull him into a conversation. Making a mental note to investigate, because he had obviously missed something important, Izuku turned back to Shinso. "Who are you going with?" Shinso cast a look at Izuku. "Dude, I haven't read all of them yet." Annoying. Izuku waves his hand in a vague hurry-up motion without verbally responding. He ignores what Shinso says in response and thumps his head down on Shinso's desk with no regard to his personal space. Closing his eyes, Izuku hopes he can get in a vague 15 minutes of light sleep before someone disturbs him. He already knows that he's going to go with Eraserhead for internships, so a nap is the most productive thing he can do at that moment. Or at least, pretend to nap while he ponders Ida. The bell rings and Ida slips out of the classroom without a word. Izuku narrows his eyes, then makes the impulsive decision to follow, because he is nearly positive that he knows exactly what Ida is thinking. After all, if there is one thing Izuku knows, it is that feeling of hatred, of injustice, that sits in your chest like a pool of cold water when you look your battered brother in his eyes. Izuku, of all people, knows how that water rises, slowly at first, and then at once, filling you up until it drags you down and all you can think about is how cold your bones have become. And Izuku knows how you can lose yourself in the intensity of your feelings and forget to swim. Izuku knows how easily it is to drown instead. Ida leaves the rest of their classmates behind impressively quick, and Izuku has to put in work to keep up with him, but he has only got to jump 1 staircase railing to get ahead of him, and he plants himself right in front of Ida at the bottom of the staircase, from the 2nd floor to the 1st. "Can I help you?" Ida asks in a clipped tone. There is no point in wasting time, so Izuku doesn't bother with niceties. "Why are you entering with manual?" Ida looks at Izuku with poorly hidden aggravation, but answers regardless. "Although I believe it to be none of your business, is because there is much I can learn from the way he manages his agency." "Oh," Izuku raises an eyebrow. "It's not because he's located in Hosu?" Ida's eye twitches the slightest amount. "I assure you that has nothing to do with it." "Kami, this is going to take forever." "Yes, it does." The look on Ida's face is so affronted that Izuku almost wants to laugh. "You know nothing about what I am thinking," he says, very obviously having to pull himself together. "You will eventually learn that showing weaknesses like that is a mistake." "No, but I do," Izuku says, his tone soft and mocking. "You want revenge on the hero killer, don't you, Ida-kun?" The full-body jerk Ida gives at the hero killer's name is a clear sign that Izuku is right. "My thoughts are none of your concern," he says with growing anger and starts to walk, clearly attempting to escape the conversation. Izuku slides up in front of him. "You're being stupid," he says bluntly, because Ida is annoying him too much for him to stay even somewhat civil. "Excuse me?" Ida says, far too loudly. "You heard me," Izuku challenges. "You're not fucking thinking. I know you want to go to Hosu because that's where Stain is, but what exactly are you planning to do once you get there?" Ida stares at Izuku for a moment, before his face turns red with anger. "Get out of my way," he says lowly. "You know nothing about my life." "Don't ignore me just because you don't like what I'm saying," Izuku retorts, and this must hit some hidden nerve of Ida's because he draws himself up. "I have a plan. I will not be going in unprepared," he says, as if that's impressive. Izuku raises an eyebrow. "Congratulations, so did all the pro heroes who died trying to take him down." Eye twitching rapidly, Ida makes a growling noise. "Stay out of my way, Shigaraki," he says, and maybe it'd be frightening to their classmates, but Izuku has lived with monsters and still calls them father. "Pull yourself together," Izuku hisses at Ida, who looks first affronted at his actions and then pissed. "How dare you speak to me like that?" Ida asks, voice shaking. He's standing shock still, and his lips are pressed so tightly together they're almost invisible. Villain. So that's how it's going to be. Izuku narrows his eyes, his own constant anger swelling from where it usually sits. Without thinking, Izuku grabs Ida's tie and yanks it down, forcing Ida to be on his level. He lets his dangerous aura spiral outwards, lip curling as he stares at the most stuck-up guy he's met the entire year. "Like recognizes like," Izuku snarls, and Ida's hardened face doesn't move. "I know exactly what you're planning, and you're going to get yourself killed." "Why do you even care?" Ida bites. "You made it quite clear you do not care for your classmates." Izuku gives him a look. "Because when you get yourself killed, no one here is going to blame you. You're all too fucking heroic for that. They're all going to blame themselves for your death." And Ida finally flinches back, looking away from Izuku, but Izuku doesn't stop talking. Every single news station in Japan will be talking about how the hero killer's most recent victim was a student, and every one of your classmates, every one of your friends will hear about you everywhere they go. Izuku takes a step closer to Ida, and every one of them will hate themselves for not noticing your pain, for not noticing you struggling, for not stopping you, for not saving you. Our teachers will be ridiculed for not stopping you, and Aizawa-sensei will place the blame fully on himself. Ida takes 2 steps away, expression starting to crumble, but Izuku is not done. "But do I know who's going to blame himself most of all?" Izuku's tone is mocking and cruel. "The man who will despair in your death, knowing it's all his fault, will be your fucking brother, Ida." And this time, at Izuku's words, Ida's head jerks up, meeting Izuku's eyes with something like panic. "He's going to tell himself," Izuku continues, stepping, prowling closer, "that if he had been a better hero and caught the hero killer, this never would have happened. If he had avoided getting hurt in the first place. If he had checked on you more. Endless ifs that will tear him apart." Izuku finally stops, pausing to inhale deeply. Ida looks like he's crumbling at the seams, but Izuku still has one last thing to say. "You are going to leave him as an only child, just because you want to be stupid, unheroic, and selfish." There is silence for a long moment, as Ida stands there looking devastated while Izuku stares at him impassively as his face returns to a mask. "There's nothing wrong with wanting revenge," Izuku finally says, "and you certainly wouldn't be the first to actually go through with it. But you want revenge against a serial killer who's taken over 40 pro heroes, while you are all of 15 years old and blinded with rage." Izuku turns and is about to walk away before he pauses, looking over his shoulder to make eye contact with Ida. "Not to mention, you're supposed to be the hero." With that, Izuku turns around, not bothering to look behind him as he walks off, shaking his head to himself. The internship is going better than Izuku initially hoped for. They're on a break right now, sitting on a random rooftop, and maybe it's the quiet, or maybe it's the way Izuku can't stop thinking about Tomura after his conversation with Ida, but no matter the reason, he finds himself speaking up. "I've always wanted to be a hero," Izuku says softly, without looking at Aizawa. Wind blows gently, tossing their hair. "I've always wanted to save people, to help others, to stop pain." Izuku's eyes close, and he looks almost pained for a moment. "But I was born a villain. I was born to hurt, to make others suffer, to cause the very thing I hated most in the world. And in that world, weakness gets you killed, so you must kill it to survive." Izuku's eyes open, and Aizawa stares at the way his green eyes glow in the darkness. The light of the stars reflects on the surface. "Yet you're here." It is not said unkindly. A sneer grows on Izuku's face, and Aizawa can tell he's recalling a memory that shaped who he is. "He underestimated me and my will." Aizawa has no illusions about who this he is. Izuku's hands curl into fists, his shoulders growing tense. "Even chained dogs have something to protect. It doesn't matter how submissive you think you've made it, no matter how many times you've kicked it down, knowing it won't get back up. The second you target that something, the dog will get up and bite back." Aizawa has no illusions about what that something is either. "That doesn't explain why you're here, why you want to be a hero. The words are not meant to be cruel.
I know I don't belong here. Not really, Izuku says softly, turning his head upwards so that he's facing the stairs. I know I've ostracized myself. I know every move I make pushes me further away from what a hero is supposed to be. But there are other kids, other people even, like me and Tomura. There are people who are so entangled in the world of villainy that they can't see a way out, or they're too afraid to try in the first place, or they've been groomed to be evil from the start. It is my job to save them, because if I don't, chances are no one will. A ringing silence follows Izuku's words. Finally, Aizawa speaks up gently, but not with pity. I've been on operations to save kids like that before. I'm not saying we're always successful, but I and others have saved more than one person from a bad situation they didn't even want to be in the first place. Would anyone have tried to save Tomura? Izuku asks, looking down at his lap. If you had shown up to the USJ and sent the Nomura after All Might, if I had never been there, if you'd never heard our conversation... Izuku jerks his head up, and his cold eyes cut into Aizawa's. Would you have even thought to save him? Never mind the fact that no one would be able to. And Aizawa won't lie to Izuku, so he stays silent instead, and that silence is answer enough. Exactly. Izuku's voice is not so much harsh as it is knowing. He would live and die as all for one's brainwashed successor. Inhaling deeply, Izuku looks into the night, peering like it might reveal the answers he spent his life looking for. But I can save him, and I can save others too. I can, so I will. Izuku is patrolling with Eraserhead, with the challenge of working strictly quirkless tonight, when Eraserhead gets the alert. Then, Izuku's phone gets an alert, which almost never happens. They stop, and as Eraserhead mutters something into his comms while reading his phone, Izuku scans the text message he's received. And, surprisingly, for the briefest moment, his heart goes cold when he can't breathe. One of his hands shoots out and latches onto Eraserhead's forearm without permission, and as the man's head whips over, eyes blazing, Izuku turns his phone towards him. From Catman. I just passed in, okay, need hospital now, yeah, I told you he's here. The text is jumbled, but the message is clear. All Izuku can say is, Shinso. And he snarls out a curse, already yanking his phone out and dialing a memorized number. As he does that, he turns around and takes off, glancing behind him to make sure Izuku is with him. Which Izuku is, of course. In fact, Izuku won't be leaving Eraserhead's side anytime soon, something Aizawa soon finds out when he tries to get into the car and tells Izuku to stay at the house. Izuku ignores him and slings himself into the passenger seat. I'll go on my own if you don't take me. Now come on, we're wasting time. A glare is thrown his way, but Eraserhead puts the car into gear just the same, taking off inadvisably fast as he switches the attention back to whatever is being told to him over the phone. Izuku sits back in his seat and looks out the window, shoving down his worry just like he'd been taught until he could no longer see it. The self-control it takes for Izuku to not literally choke out Ida is greater than he'd like to admit, and, based on the slightly terrified glances Ida keeps casting at him, his mood is radiating all too clearly off of him. There's also the fact that Izuku hasn't said a word since entering, and has only sat in a chair next to Shinso's hospital bed, arms crossed as he glowers at the rest of the room's occupants in silence. When Eraserhead and he had arrived at the hospital, the two of them were directed to the room. He and Eraser had gone in, finding Shinso passed out and the other two awake. Izuku had stood beside Eraser, silent and angry as the full story got laid out. At some point, Eraser left to talk to someone, and Ida tried to talk to Izuku, presumably to continue apologizing like a moron. Todoroki has more sense than him, however, because he's muttered something to Ida, and the two of them pass a glance to his murderous face before falling in silence. Izuku's been sitting there for maybe an hour, and Shinso for maybe 30 minutes, when Eraserhead comes back into the room, with someone following him. They've got a partial dog heteromorph quirk, one that only permanently converts part of their body in this case, the man's head. This is Chief Suragame, Eraser says, and although he briefly flicks his eyes over to Izuku, he doesn't say anything else. Shinso, Todoroki, and Ida all exchange looks as the introductions are exchanged, and Izuku just presses against the wall. He isn't going to draw attention to himself. I'm sure you're all wondering why I'm here, Suragame finally says, and Izuku almost wants to say finally. You three are responsible for taking down Stain, and you've used your quirks to do so, correct? Oh shit. Izuku immediately knows where this is going, and he looks to Eraser. He doesn't look concerned, but that doesn't mean too much, as Eraser's poker face is impressive at the least. Shinso, Todoroki, and Ida nod. It's illegal to use your quirk without a license, the chief says. You three, as well as your hero mentors, Eraserhead, Manual, and Arrow, should be dealt with strictly and impartially. Although it's clear the chief is going to say more, Todoroki doesn't give him the chance, as he, interestingly, loses his shit. Hold on, Todoroki says, voice hard and eyes narrowed.
Nato would be dead if Ida wasn't there, and both of them would be dead if it wasn't for Shinso using his quirk. I only used my quirk to hold Stain until the heroes could get there. And Stain is currently being treated for frostbite, the chief dryly interjects. Todoroki rolls his eyes and scoffs, and it makes Shinso clap a hand over his mouth to repress a laugh, while Ida looks at both of them with a scandalized look on his face.
As if Endeavour wouldn't have brought him with third-degree burns or worse.
No one can refute this argument, and the room is silent for a long moment. Despite the fact that Izuku finds Todoroki naive, he can't help but mentally cheer him on. Well, the chief finally says, what I was going to tell you three was that so long as this is not dealt with publicly, your names can be repressed from the incident, and no punishments need to be handed out. Ida's eyebrows raise almost comically high, and Todoroki looks pleasantly surprised, but Shinso once again proves himself to be Izuku's favourite. If our names are to be repressed, what can be said instead? Suragame looks surprised, as if he had expected all three of them to agree without question. He probably had. It has not been finalized, but as of right now, it looks like Endeavour will be given the credit for taking down Stain. Whatever vaguely pleasant look that had been on Todoroki's face abruptly shuts down, and he's back to the dead expression that reminds Izuku a lot of himself. He has no fire or wounds, Shinso points out dryly. Eraser looks vaguely amused, Izuku notes, and the chief is starting to look annoyed. It doesn't matter, he says, and if there was a wrong response, it was that. Doesn't matter, Shinso says incredulously. Surely you're joking, Chief. The small details matter a lot. We just established that, I thought. What are you talking about? Suragame sighs. Shinso raises an eyebrow in a way that clearly conveys he thinks Suragame is missing a few brain cells. Using your quirk in self-defense is legal, actually, and typically acceptable as long as there are no serious injuries. Suragame looks like someone has shoved a lemon into his snout. And I think anyone would agree, Shinso continues to push, that 3 first-year hero students were acting in self-defense against a serial killer who killed 17 heroes and permanently taking out another 24. And we managed to take him down without causing any injury to him that can't be healed. Shinso crosses his arms and smirks, leaning his head back and letting it thump against the wall. Tired and satisfied purple eyes stare at the chief of police. What I'm trying to say, Chief, is that the only legal room we have to work with is the fact that we acted independently as hero interns without a license or mentor present. Izuku kind of wants to applaud. Ida is staring at Shinso with a wide open mouth, his face so shocked it's nearly comical. Todoroki, on the other hand, is staring impassively at the proceedings, as usual. Eraserhead's face is also blank, but Izuku can see the shine of amusement and pride in his eyes. Young man, Suragame finally says, after an external moment of stunned silence, visibly centering himself. While most of that is true, I don't think you quite understand the position you three are in. This is not a negotiation session. And that is not something Izuku will tolerate. If this wasn't a negotiation session, you shouldn't have held it in a room with cameras, Izuku says, and every head in the room swivels towards him, all of them with surprise or alarm on their face. The law does not exclude you, Chief Suragame, and I'm sure Principal Nezu wouldn't be happy when I tell him his students were threatened illegally by the law. Who are you? What are you doing here? The chief rapidly asks, arms crossed. It does not erase the sudden flash of fear that Izuku can see rise in his eyes. This is a private room and a confidential conversation. Izuku's lip curls up in a derisive sneer. Surely you aren't blaming me because you failed to properly check that the room was clear before speaking of your own volition about Stain's capture and my classmate's role in it? The room is silent, and Todoroki chooses this moment to say with a straight face, I will go to the media with the true story if you give my father the credit. Suragame clearly understands the impact of the threat, because his face sours, and half of his snout involuntarily curls up, showing some teeth. I understand. He growls, much like an actual dog, and Izuku wonders how instinctual the sound is for him. Any other requests? Although the question is clearly sarcastic, Eraserhead steps forward. Let's talk outside, Chief. The two of them leave the room, and Shinso's face breaks into a wide smile that's a touch too sadistic to be pure. Ida still looks shell-shocked about everything that just happened, but Izuku can't spare much of a thought for him at the moment. Todoroki looks faintly pleased, and Izuku really thinks about it. That's kind of badass, Shinso says out loud into the silence of the room, and Izuku huffs out a breath in a way that's almost laugh. Todoroki clears his throat. I believe my brother would call that a big L. It's Todoroki's deadpan expression, combined with the confused face of Ida and horrified face of Shinso, that finally makes Izuku actually laugh out loud. Chapter 7. I don't want to die, so you're going to have to. Izuku isn't a fan of being tossed off of cliffs. He wasn't a fan of the bus ride here, and he wasn't a fan of meeting the overly enthusiastic heroes they'd be staying with. And he most definitely is not a fan of being told to spend hours walking through the woods while fighting dirt monsters. What he really wants to do right now is run to camp himself. He could make it in 15-20 minutes tops,
But if this were a real mission, he'd be leaving his teammates behind, and he can't do that. Not to mention, he hasn't shown a single quirk of his own besides metal manipulation, and he isn't going to blow his own cover for something as stupid as a training exercise, no matter how tedious. So, Izuku resigns himself to fighting monsters made of branches and dirt clumps, watching over his classmates who are falling behind or getting hurt. As soon as they're told about the test of courage, Izuku wants to hit his head against the wall. What a genuinely terrible idea. He's sure saying that won't go over well with anyone but Aizawa, however. So he huffs a hard breath out of his nose before trudging behind the rest of his classmates to the clearing where Class B is mostly waiting for them. And sure enough, only 2 pairs of his classmates have ventured into the forest when Izuku sees the smoke rise over the trees. Pandemonium breaks out as villains walk out of incredibly familiar portals, and Izuku is closer than ever to simply lying down on the ground and staying there for a long time. Unfortunately, his moral conscience pokes at him, so Izuku ignores the lizard heteromorph who is winking at him way too obviously and takes off towards the mountainside. With so much going on, and the cover of darkness on top of that, Izuku doesn't have to worry nearly as much about watching which quirks he's using, so it hardly takes any time at all to get to Koda's hiding place. And when he sees the hulking frame of the missing convict towering over the kid, Izuku has never been more glad that he's listened to himself. He doesn't waste any time sliding himself in between the almost grossly bulked up man and the trembling 5-year-old in the dirt. "Move, shrimp," Muscular says, and Izuku can't stop himself from rolling his eyes. This doesn't go over well with Muscular, as expected, who growls and stalks forward to crumple a hand in the front of Izuku's shirt, lifting him bodily off the ground and several meters into the air. "You're testing my patience," Muscular growls, and Izuku hears Kota whimper somewhere behind him. "I may not be able to kill you, but Shigaraki didn't say about throwing you off a cliff." What is it with people wanting to throw Izuku off cliffs lately? A grin grows across Izuku's face slowly, and it grows a little further than it should be able to, making the overall impression vaguely terrifying. Izuku raises his hand and grabs onto Muscular's giant wrist. "Kota?" Izuku calls out, ignoring the way Muscular shakes his body like a rag doll. "Close your eyes and keep them closed until I say." A whimper is the only response Izuku gets, and although he'd prefer a verbal confirmation, he can't really wait any longer. Izuku yanks and rips Muscular's quirk from his body, and watching it happen is not unlike pulling a rubber band in 2 directions until it snaps. Izuku falls to the ground as the man in front of him screams in pure pain as he's forced back into the shape of his actual body, which Izuku sees is also muscled. Not impossibly though, and that's what matters. And Izuku has a million options at his fingertips. He has many different quirks and many different ways he could take down Muscular, and many of them could be non-lethal, but there's no point in taking chances. Izuku tests out his new quirk, and his arm swells up. It is, of course, not the size Muscular was, because Izuku is nowhere near the size of unquirked Muscular. None of that matters, though, because Izuku activates his speed quirk, and as Muscular finally gets his bearings, a giant blur rushes at him. He never stood a chance. Izuku stores Muscular's quirk somewhere in the back of his brain. It'll be a while before he uses it, because that was unbelievably clumsy. It'll take practice to properly wield it, turning away from the red pile of flesh and pulverized bone on the cliffside. Izuku walks back and finds Kota crouched behind a scraggly shrub, the heels of his palms pressed tight against his eyes. Kneeling down in front of him, Izuku makes sure he's blocking Muscular from view. "Hey, Kota-kun, it's Shigaraki. You can open your eyes now." Teary eyes blink open, and the second Kota processes him, he bursts into tears, leaping into his arms. Izuku moves with the momentum, spinning so Kota will face the opposite of where Muscular's body is. There's no need to double the trauma the kid's already gained tonight. "I'll get you back to the lodge, don't worry," Izuku mutters, and he leaps off the cliffside and hits the ground running, speeding through the forest fast enough that none of his classmates will see him, let alone him using a quirk he isn't supposed to have. The edge of the woods approaches, and Izuku deactivates the several quirks he had activated. He runs regardless, just much slower, and immediately sees Aizawa. "Muscular was here," Izuku says, even as he hands Kota to Aizawa, and Aizawa widens his eyes in panic, eyes darting across both of them to make sure they're okay. Izuku can tell the exact second he clocks the amount of blood that covers his clothes and skin. "Shigaraki?" Aizawa trails off. Izuku doesn't have time for hang-ups about murder, though. "I'm going to help the others." A brief pause. "Don't let anyone go up that cliffside. Don't worry, I didn't let Kota see." The look on Aizawa's face would stick with Izuku for a long time, but he took off into a sprint into the burning forest. Something was very wrong. He'd known the invasion was probably his brother again, but Tomura would have never added Muscular to his party voluntarily. He had no kill rule, and although Izuku knew it was mostly just to make him happy, it didn't change the fact that Tomura kept it in place for him, especially if it was his class. What the fuck is going on? Izuku passed a few groups of students, most of them mobile and moving in the right direction. He paused for any stray groups and pointed them in the right direction. Soon, Izuku saw Shoji, but as soon as he did, he heard a rage-filled, inhuman scream. Catching sight of a bleeding stump where one of Shoji's arms was supposed to be, Izuku immediately knew what was happening. Dark Shadow, Izuku signed. He knew a good bit of sign, although more complex sentences would be lost on him. But Shoji talked with Koda often, so Izuku knew he knew JSL. Shoji nodded. I steal quirk to stop Dark Shadow. Shoji paused when Izuku said that, and for a moment Izuku was worried he was going to try and stop him. He didn't want to have to hurt a classmate. Be careful, Shoji eventually signed, and Izuku offered him an awkward smile that didn't fit his face. Then he took off, straight into the undulating black mass ahead. He could hear Tokoyami yelling, which meant he was still conscious. Damn. That meant Izuku actually had to touch Tokoyami, and he couldn't just steal Dark Shadow from a safer distance. Ducking a huge swiping claw, wind ruffled his hair as he slid across the leaves on the forest floor. He could see Tokoyami now, wrapped in a writhing mass of shadows, screaming and struggling in his own darkness. A rare spark of genuine sympathy ran through Izuku, for the second time that night, and he did a rather impressive handspring over the sudden black mass coming at him. He was close now. Black, raven eyes opened and met Izuku's. Tokoyami was screaming at Izuku to run, about the danger, but when he saw Izuku stuck out his hand, he also saw the spark of understanding in his eyes. There was a spark of pain, too, which Izuku didn't doubt, but in the end they didn't have much of a choice. Tokoyami stretched out his hand right as a giant yellow beak came rushing through the air at Izuku. Fingertips brushed, and in desperation Izuku pulled, and it took way more force than he was expecting. So much that Dark Shadow's beak opened around him, but it didn't close, because Izuku took the quirk free, and all of a sudden, the forest was silent, and Dark Shadow was gone. By Talos! Tokoyami collapsed onto the forest floor, heaving in a gasping breath. Thank you, Shigaraki-kun. I could not control her. The villains in the darkness, as a combination, proved too strong. It's all right. Izuku crouched down next to him. If I gave her back, do you think you could control her? I do not know, but... Tokoyami shivered and twitched. This feeling, this absence of darkness, I am missing something vital and cannot function without it. Izuku had never taken a sentient quirk for this reason, actually. I understand. Here. Grabbing Tokoyami's scratched-up hand, Izuku pushed his quirk right back into the slot it belonged in. Tokoyami took a sudden, gasping breath, latching a hand on his chest. A small shadow immediately appeared over his shoulder, nothing at all like the beast that hadn't been able to differentiate between friend and foe. I'm going to help the others, Izuku said as he stopped. He waved Shoji over from where he was peeking out from behind a tree. The lodge is that way. Izuku saw the devastated expression that managed to come across Tokoyami's feathered face when he saw Shoji's missing arm, and he nipped that shit in the bud immediately. Hey, save that shit for when you're safe. The two boys and one shadow stared at him in fear. Go to the damn lodge. I have no idea who or what is out there, and you don't have time for apologies or to feel guilty right now. Maybe it was the way he spoke, or because no one else was around to tell them otherwise, or maybe they could see the wisdom in his words. Whatever the reason, Izuku watched as they hardened, resolve forming. Good, you're going to need it. Izuku waved them off, then took off again. He needed to find where the fire was coming from. He'd strayed from it somehow. He wasn't going nearly as fast as he was with Kota earlier, because he didn't want to end up accidentally overlooking a wounded classmate. Izuku can afford to be many things, but careless is not one of them. Izuku stares down at his father and clenches his fists. It's time. There can be no more running, no more hiding. And it doesn't matter that Izuku feels like crying. It doesn't matter that this will be his final move, one way or another. It doesn't matter that this could ruin everything he's worked for, cared for. It doesn't matter that this will almost certainly be the last time Izuku ever sees his father. None of it matters in the face of the greater good. In the face of his brother, smiling, happy, nose scrunched, the face of his brother, afraid, wide eyes, lips pressed together. He'll understand one day. His father stares at Izuku, and he doesn't need eyes to do it. There's a feeling that's choking Izuku, something soulless and evil, something coated in hatred and guilt. There are only two feelings Izuku can feel coming from his father: hostility and amusement. There is no fear, and there is no love. He doesn't see me as a threat, and he doesn't see me as a son. But really, those are things Izuku has known for years. Hardness falls over Izuku like blood flows from a cut. Things will end this time, one way or another. Quirks rise to the surface as Izuku calls them to himself, and he watches as his father does the same. Energy crackles across the barren pavement between them. There is a brief, eternal moment where everything is still. Tomura, frozen in horror, his league scattered around him in confusion. All Might, blood surrounding him where he lies on the brink of death. Multiple heroes with various extensive injuries, all of them exhausted, all of them afraid. Civilians, watching the live footage across Japan, fear and disbelief in their throats. All for one, heartless as he stares at the boy who tried to love him. And Izuku, staring his destiny in the face, ready to welcome his demise with open arms as long as it means Tomura will be free. Then, the people watching blink, and everything moves. Izuku is gone, streaking across the distance between him and his dad in the blink of an eye, at a speed faster than any Ida could ever hope to achieve. All for One waves a hand, and Izuku is thrown back through the air with the force of a rocket before he even reaches him. Monstrous black claws sprout from Izuku's hands, taking over his fingers entirely, and he sinks them into the pavement as he goes flying, leaving long gouges in the ground as he stops himself. Without losing momentum, he throws himself forward again, this time screeching as he goes, at a high-pitched frequency that only animals could typically hear, which hits All for One, who briefly convulses before recovering. Izuku knows it's because he's turned off the hearing quirk he was using. The hearing quirk, which downside was that it could hear frequencies above the human hearing spectrum, ones not meant for the human ear to process. The pavement warps into spikes, missing Izuku by centimeters. The spikes follow him as he runs, and he knows the second he loses any speed he'll be run through. Izuku throws out a wave of kinetic energy at the same time All for One does, and they clash, sending a heavy force of air blowing both ways. Izuku is blown away, and as he flies to the side, he holds up a hand and squeezes it into a fist. The metal pipes on either side of his dad's mask are ripped out of place as they're forced into tight metal balls. His dad's head jerks to the side briefly, but then he snaps his head back in Izuku's direction and Izuku can feel the rage now. All for One throws another hand out, and Izuku is promptly thrown further through the air, and his body goes flying, crashing through two straight walls of one of the remaining buildings. As onlookers gasp, borderline panicking, Izuku comes nearly flying out of the wreckage. He's running so fast, a smile on his face, even as the blood leaks from his mouth, ears, and nose. Movement begins happening so fast that it's hard for onlookers to even keep up, and their horror grows steadily. Izuku zigzags off the remaining buildings, boxing them in, bouncing erratically around the space so that All for One's quirks can't keep a good read on him. And then he comes at him from behind, claws bared. Everyone watching will jerk as blood sprays, Izuku's claws raking straight across the back of All for One's head in an X motion. Izuku is ready for the pain, but that doesn't change the fact that it hurts when his dad spins around almost inhumanely fast, his arm held out so that his forearm catches Izuku in the chest, as he promptly slams his son right onto the concrete beneath them. The strength of the blow creates an indent in the ground where Izuku's body is, and the dust and gravel fly up, obscuring them both. Izuku can't hear the animal screech Tomura lets out, the way he calls Izuku's name in fear and anguish. His ears are ringing, but he doesn't allow himself to pause. He is acting on survival instincts, and Izuku's instincts have been honed by one of the greatest supervillains in history. The same claws on Izuku's hands grow on his feet, tearing through his shoes, and he's barely finished shifting before he lunges his legs up so his deadly claws rake through All for One's abdomen, from where he's still foolishly leaning over to hold Izuku to the ground. The action makes All for One buckle, but it doesn't stop him from slamming his other hand down on Izuku's neck, gripping with all his strength immediately. A killing blow. Izuku knows he only has 30 seconds before the invulnerability quirk he instantly activated will wear off, and the second it does, his dad will crush his bones like paper. Blood runs from a cut on Izuku's head into his eye, and he squints, jerking his own hand up to grasp at All for One's neck. I will not lose. I cannot let him win, no matter the cost. Reaching out, Izuku feels for the faint quirks around him, and he feels the familiar crumbly presence of a quirk he'd recognize anywhere. Izuku snatches disintegration from Tomura, and the quirk settles like an old friend. He already has 2 5-fingered holds on All for One's neck, and Izuku has to watch the look on All for One's face as he realizes what is happening. And now things are moving too fast to follow, but every moment feels like an eternity to Izuku. His dad jerks away, releasing his neck in the effort to get away from Izuku, but Izuku does not let go. 2 hands grab Izuku's forearms, yanking. The invulnerability quirk wears off as blood pours from All for One's throat, as the disintegration crawls further. His dad's grip crushes his forearms in an instant, but it's too late. Izuku is forced to let go, and his body hits the ground when his dad drops him, even as All For One's body falls backwards. He starts to convulse, blood falling from his neck even as the skin of his head disappears, followed by the muscle and bone, even as the same thing happens to his body. Izuku's broken body lies on the pavement as the remains of his father splatter across him. Distantly, he can hear someone screaming his name, but the pain he'd been ignoring quickly becomes overwhelming, and Izuku passes out with a faint, bloody smile, knowing he's won.
Chapter 8. The People's Gratitude. It'd be great if we could take these off, Izuku mumbles dully, gesturing to make the quirk's fashion cuffs jingle. I've got a minor regeneration quirk that would be really helpful if I could actually, activate it. The nurse jerks away from Izuku so hard she almost hits the wall, and Izuku is too tired to fight the urge to roll his eyes. That, of course, doesn't help, and she stutters something he can't even make out before nearly running out the door. Great. He stares blankly at the ceiling. The machines beeping around him echo over each other in his head, and he can't tell if he's imagining it or not. Where's Tomura? The seconds tick past, and every minute feels like an hour, and every hour feels like a second. Izuku distantly wonders what drugs they've got him on, because it must be the good ones. Thoughts that Izuku has gotten very good at ignoring are bubbling to the surface while he's weak to them. It isn't fair. Why am I here? Why are they doing this to me? I hate how they look at me. Why does everyone always have to be so afraid of me? Something sick worms its way down Izuku's throat so he can make a home in his lungs. They could never understand. They have no idea how hard it is, the things I've had to do. They have no idea about the sacrifices I've had to make. An angry sort of sadness fills Izuku up like a balloon. His emotions are jumping at him, free from the leash he's kept him on for years. No one else could have done it. No one else could have walked the path that I have. Izuku is so busy building up on his own feelings of injustice and rage that he doesn't notice when his hospital room door opens. In fact, all he feels and sees is a sudden figure sitting down on the end of his bed, and honed instincts kick in. Jerking up his wide-open palm, Izuku shoves a wave of kinetic energy at the intruder, only for nothing to happen. Izuku looks up and meets Aizawa's vaguely startled eyes. The quirk hands and cuffs twist around his wrists. Oh. Shigaraki-kun? Aizawa says, and Izuku jerks his head. Why can't he feel his intent quirk? Where is it? How is Aizawa feeling? How is he supposed to know? Where's Tomura? Izuku asks. Yue. Aizawa doesn't mince words, and Izuku's never been more grateful. Some of the growing tension leaves him. Tomura is safe right now, at least. What's it going to take to get these off? Izuku jerks his wrists, setting the cuffs rattling. Aizawa winces, and yet is also angry. I've been arguing with people for the past 2 days, kid. I'm working on it, I promise. Sighing, Izuku thumps his head back. Shitty reception for saving Japan, he mutters out loud, then frowns. That was supposed to be just a thought. There's a sound of shuffling as Aizawa moves, and Izuku doesn't really know what's happening until it does. 2 arms wrap around him gently and tuck his head against the chest as Aizawa hugs him. I know. I'm sorry. And maybe it's the gentle embrace. Maybe it's the injuries. Maybe it's the suppression of his quirks. Maybe it's the fear of the future, the uncertainty of what's going to happen to his brother. But for the first time in a very, very long time, Izuku's eyes fill with tears, and the little bit of leeway he has had with the chained-up cuffs allows him to bring his hands up and grasp the back of Aizawa's shirt desperately. Izuku holds on to the only person who was there for him after his brush with death, after he killed his father, after he saved Japan, and he cries. A few days later, a meeting is called that Izuku has to attend. It quickly becomes apparent to him that he's expected to be the grateful one in the scenario, and that just is not going to fucking fly. I killed All For One, Izuku snarls. The people around him flinch. Without me, All Might would be fucking dead. Some guy slams his hand on the table, jerking to his feet. Now listen here. No. The voice is not loud, but instantly there is silence. Yaki Toshinori limps into the room on a crutch, and everyone watches him. Shigaraki-kun is right. All Might, a woman says in protest, stuttering over his hero name. The man the world knows as All Might raises a hand for silence. Shigaraki-kun saved my life, and countless others. I will not insult him by pretending his deed was not as important, as heroic, as we all know it was. The room is silent. Retired or not, All Might holds power, and it's clear people are waiting to hear his opinions. The two people from the commission do not look happy, Izuku notes. There is no reason the boy shouldn't be allowed to continue attending UA, and as for... All Might pauses and waits for the murmurs to die down with a raised eyebrow before continuing. And as for your brother, All Might looks at Izuku. The case is certainly more complicated, but Nezu has already put him and several others as boards of UA for the time being while everything is sorted out. You can't be serious, one of the commission's people finally says, looking at All Might like he's insane. All Might gives the man a brittle smile filled with teeth, and Izuku briefly thinks he's close to snapping on one of those guys. You're free to take up with Nezu if you wish. That makes both of the commission people pucker their faces like they've sucked on a lemon, and makes Izuku grin slyly. Everyone in the room knows they will not. Later, outside the room, All Might tries to talk with Izuku. You saved me, All Might says, and it almost sounds like I'm sorry. But as close as it may be, it is still not an apology. And even if it was, Izuku would not accept it. It doesn't matter, Izuku says, because as much as he appreciated All Might's help back there, the result would have been the same. Fear will always win, and right now, I don't think there's a single person in Japan who isn't afraid of me besides my brother, who is almost equally feared. My boy. All Might goes to set a hand on Izuku's shoulder, but Izuku ducks and moves away. It is too little, too late. I don't think you people grasp just exactly what Izuku's done, Aizawa says lowly. The president of the commission raises her eyebrow at him, and it makes Aizawa want to smack her. I want you to think about what would have happened if Izuku hadn't been there. Aizawa stares at her, red eyes burning. I want you to think about All Might not only losing, but dying, on national TV, live. The president pinches her lips together, and Aizawa knows every terrible consequence is running through her mind. You don't have to like it, you don't even have to publicly endorse it, but you have to acknowledge that Izuku killed All for One, or else he'll do it for you. The president stares at Aizawa for one long moment. What does he want? She abruptly says, because that's what this is really about. A full pardon for his brother and their caretaker. The warper? The president closes her eyes and even goes as far as to rub the bridge of her nose with stress. Yes. And what exactly does he expect us to say? Kurogiri the warper was brainwashed under All for One, and the brother, Tomura, was forced through coercion. How true even is that? More than you think. What are the chances of this backfiring on the commission? UA will take full responsibility. The president looks up at these words, finally. Fine, but I want these terms in a contract. Aizawa nods, and he doesn't let it show as relief washes over him. Chapter 9. Healing Yippee. Izuku watches the way they flinch away when he turns to look at them. And a twisted up, nearly crumpled away part of him wants to cry when he sees it. Instead, he turns away with a blank face, because things like that only hurt if you let them, and Izuku learned a long time ago how to avoid that pain. Their fear doesn't touch him, their hatred can't burn him. He refuses to let it. A girl hits the wall in her haste to get away from him. A boy shields the girl next to him as they pass Izuku in the hall. There is a shaky smile thrown his way, even as they close their eyes tightly when Izuku has to walk closely to them due to the nature of the stairwell. The first time he walks in the cafeteria afterwards, he hasn't even made it back to his table before something wet hits the back of his head, and Izuku can tell from the smell that it's a handful of soba that lunch rush was serving that day. He eats outside after that. Izuku doesn't bother hanging around his classmates anymore. He doesn't think he can take it if the people who have grown to accept him hate him once more. He doesn't bother hiding the use of his quirks anymore. The second the bell rings, he's speeding out the door, only a blur. Monoma doesn't even try to taunt him, only stares at him with a pale face and wide eyes before rapidly walking past him without making eye contact. The news footage of him fighting All for One is steadily trending on social media. People are afraid of him. His intent quirk has to be left off these days. Otherwise, the wave of sheer hatred and fear directed towards him is too much for him to handle. That's fine. He's happy to be their bad guy. None of it matters. None of it can touch him. Izuku doesn't need their approval or support to survive. At least, that's what he tells himself. Aizawa is surprised to approach his apartment, only to see Shinso sitting against the wall next to his front door. Can I help you? Aizawa unlocks his front door, watching with amusement as Shinso groans as he stands, his joints popping. "I gotta talk to Shigaraki-kun," Shinso says, following him when Aizawa beckons him inside. "Then why were you outside when he's definitely here?" Aizawa asks, raising an eyebrow. Shinso slips off his shoes and puts on a pair of guest slippers. He won't talk to anyone in class, at all. He doesn't answer messages or anything. I think he's avoiding us because everyone else is being an asshole. Interesting. Aizawa knew Izuku was avoiding everyone, of course, but he also knew that forcing the kid to do anything was next to impossible and would only turn him against him. Maybe he doesn't want to talk to any of you. Aizawa expects Shinso to pause or stumble, but he doesn't. He only sets his face, determination lining him. "He can tell me that to my face, then. That jackass is my friend, and I'll be damned if I let myself get ignored without an explanation." This kid. Aizawa shakes his head to himself, a rueful grin on his face. "Go on then, second door on the right." Shinso sends him a brief, wry smile before jetting off. Aizawa has no doubt that Izuku knows Shinso is here, so he has to hope that he'll give the kid a chance. Izuku has Tomura, of course, and he'll have Toga, Dobby, and Spinner once they're out of rehabilitation. But that's not nearly a big enough social circle for a high school boy. Not to mention, Aizawa is bright enough to recognize the look on Shinso's face when he's around Izuku. It's almost cute if he doesn't think about it too much. Izashi had been the one to point it out to him, however, that sometimes, occasionally, Izuku will have that same look, too. And Aizawa doesn't want him to lose that. Izuku has half his body out the window when Shinso comes through the bedroom door. The bedroom door, which has been unlocked and opened courtesy of Tomura, who's wearing a shitting grin. "Really?" is the first thing Shinso says, which Izuku begrudgingly admits is fair. "I don't know what you're talking about." Izuku responds with a straight face, more out of instinct than anything else, and Tomura snorts. "Dude, be serious and get back in here," Shinso says exasperatedly, although a smidge of fondness underlies his tone. There's a second where Izuku visibly debates launching himself out the window, but one look at Tomura tells him that his brother will undoubtedly cause him problems if he does so. Sighing loudly, Izuku climbs down from the windowsill, sinking back inside. Now it's just silent, which is actually worse than when Izuku was actively sneaking out of the window to avoid human contact. Shinso finally speaks with a sigh after Tomura stealthily slips out of the room. "I've been trying to talk to you since you've been back, you know. Why have you been avoiding me?" "Calm me straight to the heavy shit." Izuku makes a vague noise that could perhaps be a broken washing machine, or even a particularly morose bird, but he starts talking anyway, not even sure why he's doing so. Shinso speaks back, and they continue talking, on, until nearly 4 hours have passed without either of them noticing. Guilty, Shinso says he should have been back at the dorm an hour ago, which only makes Izuku grin. He stands up regardless, though, offering a hand to Shinso and hauling him up from where they sprawled out across the ground. "Before I go, there was one more thing I wanted to talk to you about, or just tell you, I guess," Shinso says, his eyes dying to look at the wall above Izuku's head. "What is it?" Izuku pauses from where he'd been turned to walk to his bedroom door. Shinso harshly bites his lip for a moment, then seems to realize what he's doing and abruptly stops. "Listen, Shigaraki-kun, I wanted to tell you." He takes a hesitant step closer to Izuku, and Izuku has to work to not suddenly blurt out something. A hand with fingers that are longer than his reaches out to hover over Izuku's arm. "Oh shit, oh my fucking god, shit damn fuck." Contrary to the steady stream of profanity that's on repeat in his head, Izuku takes a calm step forward as well, allowing his arm to fully press into Shinso's hold. "Yeah?" Izuku prompts, although his voice sounds a little hoarse for some reason. Shinso inhales and seems to fortify himself. Dull purple eyes look into Izuku's with determination shining out of them. "I like you a lot, Izuku. Would you go on a date with me?" Suspecting that it was going to happen was a lot different than actually having it happen, Izuku reflected as his eyes grew wide despite his lack of shock. His eyes scrunch up at the corners as he offers Shinso a small smile through strands of pure white hair. "I'd really like that.